Oh, oh. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the meeting started. And I wanted to verify Chitsame is here. Good. Okay, great. So good evening. And I'd like to welcome you to the public hearing on the fiscal year 2022-2023 operating budget for today, Thursday, February 17th, 2022, beginning at 6:33 p.m. Like to start with the roll call of the Finance and Claims Committee.
Greg, could we have the interpreter please say their message first before we move on?
Sure. So we'll hold for we have English to Spanish interpretation. So I'll let them give their message before we move into the roll call.
Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Tomás Trinidad. Ustedes saben, también tenemos el servicio.
Tomás, we cannot hear you. You have to get out of the room.
I am not
so
in the room yet.
You.
Can you hear me? 1, 2, 1, 2. I am not
Tomás,
in the room
we
yet.
cannot hear you. You have to leave the room.
I am not in the room yet.
No, we can't hear you.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2.
If you'd like to join the interpretation and hear the presentation interpreted from English to Spanish, click on the interpretation globe icon on the bottom of your screen and select Spanish.
Can you hear me now? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Uno, dos, si quiere escuchar la traducción.
Tyler, if you want to end interpretation and then restart it again, that way Tomás can speak.
Got it.
Thank you.
1, 2, 1, 2. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Buenas tardes a todos. Queremos informarle que también tenemos estos servicios en español. Si usted quiere escuchar la conferencia que vamos a hacer en español, solamente tiene que ir al globo que va a ver debajo de su pantalla y tocar el botón y poner el mute de inglés al español. Toda la conferencia va a ser en inglés. Inmediatamente comencemos. Va a haber traducción disponible, solamente tiene que ver el globo en la parte inferior, en la parte de abajo de la pantalla, y va a escuchar todo el material en español. Gracias. Okay, finish.
Thank you. All right, Greg, we're okay to continue. Thank you.
Okay, so did you reactivate the interpretation?
I need,
there it is. Very good. Okay, so
you.
why don't we have a do-over? And now we're ready to start. So again, good evening. I'd like to call to order the public hearing on the fiscal year 2022-2023 operating budget for today, Thursday, February 17th, 2022 at 6:30. Excuse me, now, yes, we started at 6:33 p.m. I'd like to start with the roll call of the Finance Committee of the Common Council. Starting with Council Member David Hooverman.
Present.
Council Member Tom Keegan.
Here.
Council Member John Kides. I do not see present. Council Member Jen McMurray.
Here.
Council Member Nora Najelski-Eichner.
Present.
Council Member Diana Revelous.
Here.
Thank you. And Council Member Greg Burnett is present, so we have a quorum. Moving on to item 3. We look forward to several of our residents. We look forward to your input and comments on the operating budget. as proposed for the city departments, Board of Education, and grant agencies. The public hearing tonight will not address those items in the capital budget. So we're only focusing on the operating budget this evening. So the capital budget items such as school construction projects will not be addressed tonight. Our overall goal is to keep tax rates as low as possible by allocating those funds necessary to maintain and in several cases, improve the services to our residents. We plan to draw down funds from our general fund balance or rainy day fund to provide tax relief to our residents during the upcoming fiscal year. However, it's essential that this drawdown does not create the drawdown has a minimal impact effect on the city's financial posture so that we can maintain our AAA bond rating. And that will enhance our ability to move forward with further borrowing capabilities as it relates to capital projects, school construction, and citywide improvements. We're faced with several budget challenges and priorities, as well as the continued economic impact of the COVID pandemic, as several of you have seen the impact within your own households. However, decisions have to be made as to what actions we take on now and what other actions we phase in future budgets. At the close of the public hearing, we will conduct a special meeting of the Common Council Finance and Claims Committee to discuss and recommend the operating budget cap. The cap represents the maximum limit on the total appropriation for the upcoming fiscal year. This recommendation will then be presented to the full Common Council for approval on Tuesday, February 22nd. Once the cap is set, the BET, the Board of Estimate and Taxation, will then conduct departmental meetings and reviews throughout the month of March, which will culminate with a BET public hearing on March 23rd on the operating budget. So this is not the end, but just really the beginning of the overall review process. Tonight, those individuals that wish to speak on the operating budget may raise their hand electronically to be recognized. Once recognized, please state your name and address for the recording, for the record. And please limit your response to 3 minutes or less. We will provide you with a 30-second verbal alert to keep us on schedule and ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak if they so wish to. Also, we have received several emails from Norwalk residents prior to the meeting, which have been shared with all Common Council members. The City of Norwalk Comptroller, Chitsime Lam, will read the email submitted, which specifically requested to be read into the minutes. As noted, we also have translation available via Zoom for those that wish to utilize that option. So at this time, we will first move through the reading of the emails that have been sent. Again, those emails that have been specifically requested to be read into the minutes, and we have several. So we will try to move this as quickly as possible, and then we will open the floor for those that have wish to speak. Again, you will raise your hand electronically and we'll allow you the opportunity to share your comments. So Chitsime, I'll turn it over to you.
Start with Allison Sullivan, 6 Cannon Brook Lane. Dear members of the Common Council, Board of Education, and Mayor Rilling, I am writing to express my concern regarding the inadequate funding of the Norwalk Public School operating budget for 2022-23. And I would like my comments to be entered into public records for the budget cap meeting tomorrow night. A 3.75% increase in education funding is unacceptable to me and my family, and is so much disgracefully lower than the requested 9.1% increase. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligations, and it fails to account for the drop-off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. Underfunding Norwalk Public School will have a significant negative impact on our school and children at such an unprecedented time in our history. How can we work to recover from the disruption COVID has had on learning, support the mental health of our students and staff, while keeping up with the regular maintenance needed to keep our schools in working order with such limited funds? I am willing to accept slightly higher taxes for a more robust commitment that directly benefits all our children and families, and would hopefully keep us from running into this issue year after year. I don't understand why funding our school is an issue and a fight that needs to be had every single year. It should be the most basic, non-negotiable line item in the budget. The children are our future, and it's about time Norwalk acknowledges and properly invests in them. The Common Council and Board of Education need to have regular working meetings throughout the year to develop a more committed, transparent, and productive relationship that benefits our children. Thank you for your time and your consideration. I trust that you will do the right thing for our children and our schools. Many thanks. Allison Sullivan, 6 Canyon Brook Lane. Allison Noel. To whom it may concern, I have been a proud Norwalk resident for the past 10 years. I have a daughter who is currently in 4th grade. I am currently the PTA president at CMS, as well as member of the SGC. I was a teacher for 17 years and have been substituting in Norwalk Public Schools since the start of the 2021 school year. As a career educator and a parent, I am committed to provide our students with the best possible education. To me, it's simple. Good towns have good schools. I love the city, and I believe that education is a worthy investment in so many different ways. The proposed 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable to best serve the needs of the students in the city. As described, this amount does not even begin to cover current contractual obligation. It fails to account for the drop-off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. As a career educator, to say this is quite concerning is an understatement. Moving forward, we need a clear, well-articulated plan from the city on how they are going to support our schools. Quite honestly, this yearly fight is exhausting. For a city that touts housing development as a means of increased tax revenue, I fail to understand how year after year we can't afford to run the schools in this city. Allison Noel, 4 Old Lantern Place. Adriana Hudson, 55 West Ave. I can't attend Thursday's public hearing, but I like my comments to be read and entered into the public record. Thank you for holding this much needed public hearing, as the quality of our kids' education is at stake and threatened. A 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable for our kids. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligations and fails to account for the drop-off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. How is this possible? Additionally, we really need a more transparent and efficient leadership in our city. The Common Council and Board of Education need to have regular working meetings throughout the year to develop a more committed, transparent, and productive relationship that benefits our children. This is why we elected you. Let's give the children of Norwalk the type of education they need and deserve, and consider fully funding the proposed budget. Thank you. All the best. Amy Strickland, 4 Barnfield Road. To all concerned, I am writing as a parent of 3 children in the Norwalk Public School System. I have a 10th grader at Brian McMahon High School, a 7th grader at Rowan, and a 4th grader at Rowan Elementary. My children have all been going to Norwalk Public Schools since kindergarten, so I feel I have a lot of experience with the many aspects of Norwalk Public School System. I'm also an SGC member for Rowan Middle School. I speak to many parents from all school levels regularly, and I can tell you I have never heard such negativity towards the Norwalk Public School System as I do today. More and more parents are considering if they can find the funds to put their children in private school. This is a huge shift considering before the pandemic. I was hearing the opposite. This is very troubling to me as I have always sang the praises of Norwalk Public School. Obviously, the pandemic has caused many changes and troubles for the school system, and I know this is happening around the country as well. But importantly, the vitality of the city school system is a reflection of a city as a whole. I don't think you can deny that if a school system is thriving, that the community feels this and pushes it forward to other aspects of city life. So to hear you are considering only a 3.75% increase in education funding when this amount does not even cover current contractual obligations and fails to account for the drop off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs is unacceptable to me. Our schools are desperate for funds, and it is wrong to put the school system at such a low level of priority. Others who I have spoken with, and I would be willing to accept slightly higher taxes for a larger commitment that directly benefits all of our children and resets these budgets for subsequent years. I also feel community would like to see the Board of Ed and Common Council having more transparent, regular working meetings throughout the year, showing a more committed and hopefully productive relationship that benefits our children. Again, I feel our school system should be the top priority of this administration. Thank you for your time, and please read my comments in the public records. I cannot attend the meeting. Yes. April, Kirk, and AJ Winterstrom, Oxyoke Lane. Mayor Rilling, Ms. King, members of the Board of Education and District D Common Council. I am writing again to share my family's commitment to Norwalk and the Norwalk Public Schools, and most specifically to offer our support of Board of Education's request for increased funding for Norwalk Public School. Since my last email earlier this week, I've heard back directly from members of the Common Council who support the request in some way. I am most appreciative of the response and commitment to Norwalk's children and community members. I believe our fiduciary responsibility to our constituents and neighbor is of utmost importance, and my fervent hope is that you support an increase in the Board of Ed budget this year. I also believe that the Common Council and Board of Ed should consider hosting regular working meetings throughout the year to develop a more committed, transparent, and productive relationship that benefits our children and community. Doing so will also shine sunlight on the issues facing Norwalk and will likely bolster the commitment each member of your board has and give Norwalk community constituents, children, parents, all taxpayer and community members. As I shared in my last email, our family is committed to Norwalk and is willing to accept slightly higher taxes to support our schools. Though subjective, defining slightly higher for our family would be in the amount of approximately $20 per month in support of educating the student in Norwalk schools. We are willing to pledge our investment because it directly benefits all of our children, and we ask that you support and approve a portion of the Board of Education's funding request. Again, my hope is that you recognize our commitment, for we as a family have spoken up at numerous funding meetings, Common Council meetings, Board of Education meetings, as well as planning and zoning meetings to pledge our belief in supporting the Board of Education and most specifically, all the children of Norwalk Public Schools. Thank you for your consideration and for sharing our commitment by submitting this pledge into the record. Bridget Connolly, 98 Winfield Street. Hello, my name is Bridget K. Connolly, and I live at 98 Winfield Street with voting district C1 and would like this to be read as part of the public comment in tonight's meeting. As many Norwalk citizens are, I'm exhausted to be having the same budget discussions year after year to fight for our children and our schools. We need a better plan moving forward. It shouldn't be a crisis every budget season, but rather a considered, thoughtful, and ongoing process. Couldn't the Common Council and Board of Ed meet throughout the year on such an important topic? Until that happens, here we are. A 3.75% increase in education funding is not adequate or acceptable, knowing the contract commitments the district has in place and knowing federal funding adjustment that will hit us as well. Could someone please explain the purpose of the mall and other new developments in Norwalk? When we told that these additions would be addition to our tax base and help with our city budget, yet here we are again looking to make cuts to our children, our future instead. And worst of all, it's coming out of a pandemic when we know more focused education and support services will be needed. Carrie Wanamaker, 15 St. John Street. We are reaching out to request that the Common Council fully fund the Board of Education budget for next year. The children of the city deserve a serious investment in their education. A 3.75% increase, which does not even cover current contractual obligation, is inadequate and unacceptable. Additionally, this increase failed to even account for the loss of the federal dollars, which Norwalk Public Schools were forced to spend on basic operational costs. We would gladly incur a $13 to $30 month tax increase if it meant the children of Norwalk could receive a properly funded education. The expense of not providing our children with a good education will be so much higher. Annually, we see recommendations from the city to not fully fund the Board of Ed budget. And I have to wonder how anyone expects our children to succeed when we continue to shortchange them and the staff. Going forward, the Common Council and Board of Ed should hold regular meetings throughout the year to develop a committed, productive relationship that benefits our children. The annual budget battle is embarrassing and frustrating for the parents, for the residents of the city. It shouldn't be a surprise every year what the Board of Ed will be asking for. It shouldn't come as a shock that the Board of Ed will be asking for an increase every year due to our contractual obligation. Never mind the constantly increasing costs to educate our children. Perhaps there were better communication and transparency throughout the year. Everyone would be better prepared to understand what Norwalk Public School would be asking for and why, how it would benefit our children, and what other areas of the city's budget can and should be impacted to further increases. Lastly, it is exhausting that every year there is a battle for education funding. The city needs a clear plan moving forward regarding how our schools will be supported. It can't and shouldn't be a crisis every year. We have an abundance of development going on in this city, but somehow we don't have an increase in tax dollar to invest in the education each year. How is it that we can't afford to run the city or our schools with so much growth going on around town? Please fully fund the Board of Ed budget. Carrie Wanamaker and Jason DePalma, 15 St. John Street.
Chitsame, I don't like to give you a little bit of a break. We have several more emails to read, but Larry and Tyler, at this time I see there are 7 hands raised for those that have zoomed in. Why don't we hear from those that have zoomed in, and then we'll continue with the emails that have been submitted.
Sure. I'll start reading off the list, and then whenever you'd like to continue, just let me know. So I'll go down the list. What I'll do is I'll just say your name. Just please state your name and address for the record, and then I'll allow you to unmute. You can unmute and then begin to ask your question. So Gloria, we will start with you.
Can everyone hear me? Hello? Yes, okay. Dear Common Council members, my name is Gloria Niederer, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my husband, Eric. We both live at 36 Putnam Road in Norwalk. We ask that you fully fund the proposed Board of Education budget. In the alternative to fully funding, we ask that the Common Council and BET identify with specificity in-line items and amounts it finds to be unnecessary to provide a free, appropriate public education as required by law and in the best interests of our students and our community. We also ask the district that if any cuts, if made, not affect building-based staffing and services, which will directly and most significantly impact the learning and environment of our city students. Considering what is needed, a 3.75 increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligations and fails to account for the drop-off of federal dollars that MPS was forced to spend on operational costs. At the joint meeting on Tuesday, one of the members on the Common Council asked about contractual obligations specifically. So you all know what is needed, and to decide anything less than what our children require would be irresponsible and callous. We ask for everyone to search for savings with a critical eye, but provide the funds needed to invest in our children and the future of this city. With that being said, we know money is not in infinite supply. We have stated this in the past and it has not changed. We are willing to accept slightly higher taxes for a more robust commitment that will directly benefit all of our children and reset these budgets for subsequent years. We believe that children are the best investment and their success will bring Norwalk to the next level. We are drained from having this fight year after year, but as tired as we both are, we will not give up. Even after our children leave the school system, we will still fight for the funding that these children need. That's how strongly we feel about public education. It is without a doubt the bedrock to which our community, both locally and globally, is built upon. It is a rare opportunity at a universally equitable start for our children. Education is what will save our planet, and the commitment we show to these children today will give them the tools they need: knowledge, confidence, morality, empathy, equity, to make our city and our world a much better place than it is today. But in order to achieve this, we need a clear plan from the city moving forward on how they are going to support our schools. We cannot go from budget crisis to budget crisis or kick the can that so many past administrations and common councils have done, which compounds the current budgetary reality. The city touts housing development, bringing tax revenue to the city, but year after year, we are told we can't afford to run the city properly, including public education. We need to decide what is a priority, and our schools must be at the forefront. If you all want to see a return on investment from Norwalk children, then let's stop shortchanging them, hoping that a half-hearted investment will result in prosperous dividends. That's a risk we cannot afford anymore. So please stop kicking the can. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If we could have the next speaker, and I'd just like to remind everyone, if you can please take 3 minutes for your comments. And while we're bringing in the next speaker, I just want to mention that John Kides, a member of the Finance and Claims Committee, has joined the meeting. And also we have members of the Common Council that have joined. On my screen, I see Barbara Smith, Dominique Johnson, Diana Revolus, Nicole Ayers, and that is it. So the next person. Oh, I'm sorry, and Heidi Altman. Thank you, Heidi.
I don't know if you can see the messages. The Creole translators, I think, just need to be their status updated to panelist.
The Creole interpreter has joined the meeting.
I believe the name is Club Toastmasters. Tyler,
All right.
if you can
I'll
promote
Yep,
Club,
I'll promote them.
Club Toastmaster and update the interpretation room.
Will do.
to,
And then Astrid, you'll be the next to talk. So whenever you're ready, just unmute. And once you get close to the 3-minute mark, I'll just chime in and let you know that we're near the end.
Just for chair, I was here for attendance.
Yes, I did
Yeah.
have you for attendance. Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, next speaker,
Yep,
Astrid.
Astrid, you'll be good to go. Now you might just have to
You're
unmute yourself.
muted.
Tyler, there's another Creole translator, Jonathan Jean Freos. There's two.
Et merci. Gon deuxième interprète créole, Jonathan Jean-François.
Oui, oui.
Yes, yes.
All right, I'm not sure where Astrid is. We'll move down to Sonia Morales.
OK, mbawe ki kote Astreye, kounya nou pral bouje a Sonia Morales.
One
you-
moment, Tyler, can you add them to the?
Yep, you got it.
Hold on one
French
second,
interpreter.
Sonia. Can you mute the interpreter, please?
No, they have to enter the room first and they'll be muted. But we cannot mute them.
Okay.
They must be added to the room first.
And after that, please promote the interpreter and as well send the invitation for the interpreter to interpret. And that will be taking care of itself. Sorry to
Yes.
disturb.
Yes, he should be doing that for you right now.
Thank you.
There we go.
Okay, so they'll both move, and then Sonia, if you would like to speak, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We can hear you.
Good evening, Common Council Chairman Burnett and Common Council members. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me and my concerns. My name is Sonia Morales and I live at 7 City Road in Norwalk. I'm here to talk about the recommended City of Norwalk operating budget and how it is detrimental to our children. I am a community member and a social worker who is very concerned about the well-being of Norwalk children and youth negatively impacted by the COVID pandemic over the past couple of years. Our kids are in crisis and we need to address and invest in youth social, emotional, and mental health. The flat funding of the Norwalk Public School District Board of Education budget last year has decreased the number of support for families and students, including small group academic intervention, staffing rations for counselors and social workers, and delayed implementation of community-wide social emotional learning support. The City of Norwalk, Norwalk Public Schools, and community-based organizations are responsible for meeting the needs of our children and should provide support, including adequate funding. The Norwalk Act Social Emotional Health Initiative in Norwalk is focused on organizing and providing resources to develop the social emotional skills essential for the lifelong success of our children and families. As an example, I received a case from the Department of Children and Families, DCF, for a suicidal child to connect with appropriate services in Norwalk, such as individual and family counseling. After looking for resources in the community, behavioral providers, there are very few and private. If the child has husky, only there is one provider in the area with limited access to services, and if the family speaks another language, it's even more difficult to find support for those children and families. At the school, social workers and psychologists are not enough to attend all cases. So how can we address the needs of our children and youth collectively? I'm asking for all leaders in Norwalk to prioritize the needs of our children and youth by creating a joint city of Norwalk, Norwalk Public Schools and community plan with the support of the Social Emotional Health Initiative to address their needs utilizing data from the Norwalk Youth Survey. Second, aligning the action steps with funding streams from the City of Norwalk and Norwalk Public School District, which includes fully funding MPS small group academic interventions, increase in counselors and social workers, and community-wide social emotional learning support. 3, collaborating to create out-of-the-box an innovative solution at the city and school district level to address the needs of Norwalk children and youth. 4, including feedback from parents, children, and community members with regards to recommendations or action steps to increase support and help them feel more connected during these challenging times. What are you doing for the future of this city and the country? Please add behavioral professionals at the school and don't cut the few resources the schools have now. Thank you for your time and commitment to the children of Norwalk.
Right, thank you, Sonia. So next will be Laura Garcia. You can unmute when you're ready, Laura.
Hi, how are you? Good.
Oh, looks like you took her, you can take Sonia off.
Oh, yeah. Just
Thank you.
get. Okay, good evening, Common Council. My name is Laura Garcia. I live in 297 Eli Avenue, Norwalk. I'm a mom, I'm an activist, and I'm a community advocate for Norwalk Acts. And I'm here because I'm asking to fund the whole budget for the Board of Education, because I believe in education. I came from a third world country where the public schools are the worst, because the government keep cutting and cutting and cutting the budget. I believe in kids, I believe in future, and I believe that we need to support our kids. I have a kid, he's 12 years old, and he used the program ESL 2 years ago. Now he's in 6th grade, he's in middle school, and he keep honors. So I believe that all these programs are so important for all our kids. Sports to keep them busy, ESL for all the kids that, like my son, came from other countries. They are the future, and I don't know why we keep cutting and cutting all the wins for these kids. And I believe too that we need to support the social emotional programs, because with the pandemic, the kids are bullying more, the kids are increasing. The flat funding of the Norwalk Public School District Board of Education budget last year was decreasing the number of support for families and students, including a small group academic intervention, staffing, and counselors. My son, he was in need of counselor, and we need to wait for almost 3 months to get an appointment with the counselor of the schools. So please, I want to stop until you and all the people in Norwalk fight for our kids. They are the future for all our community. Thank you so much.
Hello, Julie, you're unmuted. You can begin.
Julie.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we
¿Me
can.
pueden escuchar?
Terrific.
Sí,
Thank
te
you.
podemos escuchar. Gracias.
So thank you, first of all, for the
Gracias
opportunity to
primero
speak
por la
tonight. And thank you all for sitting in the seats that you're in. So my name is Julie Fleming. I live at 1 Arrowhead Court. I'm a 7-year resident of Norwalk, and I'm the parent of a kindergartner in the Norwalk Public Schools. I am speaking tonight in support of increased funding for our public schools. I'm disappointed to hear that the council is considering not fully funding the requested budget for the next school year, particularly after the very difficult last 2 years that our students, their teachers, and our parents have endured. Surely it has become clear, not only in our own city, but in towns and cities across the country, that thanks to COVID-19, our students are now in special need of both remedial support in academics and also incremental support in social and emotional management skills. There are 3 issues that concern me when it comes to the council's consideration of underfunding the school board's requested budget. First, that such a choice will mean students will not get the additional social and emotional supports in school that they so desperately need and deserve. Second, that such a choice will mean that the South Norwalk School, so long in coming, will not have the kind of incubation that will set it up for success. And these students have waited very long and richly deserve a successful school in their neighborhood. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, I am concerned about what the council's reasoning behind choosing not to fully fund the proposed educational budget means about the values of our city and the future of our school district. We are currently using short-term federal COVID relief funds to fill baseline educational needs, as several speakers previously have spoken to. And what's going to happen when these funds run out? Do we just ask our children to accept less? Does our city truly lack the will or the ability to provide things like reading and math specialists to students who are struggling? What is more important than teaching a child to read? I know that there's an ongoing efficiency study, and I certainly hope that it finds massive inefficiencies in our public schools so that we're able to find an easy solution. But I'm not hopeful. If greater efficiency cannot address our need, we either need more funds locally, more funds from the state via fair educational cost sharing, or we accept that we're not going to be able to give our students what they need. And I really and truly do know what we are, I really and truly do want to know what we're going to do. I urge the council to support our public school children and our teachers in the next fiscal year by fully funding our schools. And again, I thank you for your time and efforts.
Apoyar toda nuestra educación. Gracias por su tiempo.
All right, Diane Lauricella, you are next.
Good evening, Chairman Burnett and the committee and the council folks on this call. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Diane Lauricella at 21 Blue Mountain Ridge. I'm a 35-year resident of Norwalk, and I have often come to these meetings to request again that parents really study the budget line by line for the Board of Ed, as well as the city. After you've done that, then let's see where we can find economies of scale. I'm here tonight to ask that there eventually be some Board of Ed increases to accommodate some important needed services. However, tonight, I ask that you do not raise the cap unless and until you have done the following. Has the city and the Board of Ed scrubbed all existing accounts where monies are not allocated to see if we can come up with additional monies that are needed? Number two, can we find more savings in combining functions and realize big savings? I do feel there are inefficiencies in the Board of Ed budget, and hopefully that efficiency study will show it. Number three, there is an election this year for our state legislators. I hope these parents will be as enthusiastic as far as demanding a better ECS formula, because Norwalk is getting short-shafted, yes, yet again. There have been some improvements, but still bad. Number four, where are places where savings and savings can be found? Number one, and this has to do with the Board of Ed. Has the Board of Ed, it's a rhetorical question, unless and until the Board of Ed finds a way to better handle its high electricity costs through the use of renewable energy and efficiencies, much more than they are currently doing, even though you council people have been told otherwise. We can have huge savings, hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings by creating energy. There has been resistance from staff and some council members for years. Number two, natural gas and oil, those can be reduced by shifting to efficient electric schools. Number three, waste management. The school system currently still does not have an effective recycling and reduction program. I have been advocating for this for months. I would like the parents to make sure they understand how hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars are being wasted every year by inefficient Board of Ed management on these issues alone. Lastly, I ask that the Board of Ed scrub some of their central office as a trade in good faith, reduce at least 2 or 3 of the newly hired expensive central office people and donate those funds to the important social emotional learning consultants. The city of Norwalk itself must also include, in order to make sure we have enough, and I'll wrap up, I think we need diversity, equity, and inclusion permanent staff person. I know it's been mentioned by Ms. Ayers and others. That should be part of the funding and operating budget. There should be a permanent sustainability officer like every other city our size is. I know that the city is looking into it, but let's do it for this round. And lastly, and this will fund a lot of the Board of Ed needs, as well as the city, let's make our grant coordinator position, which is on the operating budget, a full-time position. Our priorities are wrong if we have a full-time communications officer and a part-time Grants Officer. With that, I thank you for letting me speak. I really am here to help you. I have looked at these budgets for years, and I could assist in any way in helping you find those important savings. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Diane.
Gracias por su tiempo.
All right, Roshni, you will be allowed to speak.
La próxima persona, por favor.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Escuchar todos? Sí.
All right. Dear members of the Common Council,
Miembro del Consejo.
hello everyone. My name is Rasha
Hola,
Yusuf
Sonia.
and I live on Scribner Avenue.
Yo,
I appreciate the
soy
opportunity to say a
residente de
few
acá, y
words
veo esta
on
oportunidad
behalf
para
of the
decir unas
members
cuantas
of the
palabras
Center of
en
Youth
nombre
Leadership
del
at Brian McMahon
Centro
High School.
de
Our
la Escuela
resolve as
Superior.
advocates and
Yo puedo
students
ver
has
como
been tested
abogado,
several times as of late.
por varias veces.
There was a vote by the Darien Board of Education to
Ha
opt out
sido
of the
una
Open Choice
por la
program.
Junta de
The vote was
Educación,
followed by
y
negative
el
comments
voto
online
fue seguido
about our
por
students,
comentarios
presumably
negativos
from
por
Darien
otros
residents.
estudiantes y
There
por
was a
otros
negative comment
residentes.
about our students
Había
by
comentarios
Norwalk's chief
negativos de
financial
otros.
officer. And then you have the funding increase
Para
that this Common Council
nuestro
has proposed
estudiante
for our
y
schools.
ahora tenemos
In the face of these indignities, we're still here because when things appear
perdón,
hopeless, students are the hope.
estamos esperando
Maintaining the
sea
status
de
quo
que
in
se
school
pueda
services for
mantener los
students is
servicios
unacceptable,
dentro de la escuela,
especially where a mental health is
mantener esto así
concerned.
especialmente cuando
We
hay
implore
preocupación con nuestra
that
salud
we
mental.
implore you to read the results of the
Les
student
rogamos de
survey
que
that the
ustedes
Norwalk
lean
Partnership conducted
la
last year. If you already
encuesta
read
que
the
hicimos
report,
el año
we
pasado
kindly ask that you
y
read it
que
again.
donde nosotros
Please
le
note,
hablamos, por
top
favor que
3
lo lean
pieces of
una vez más.
legislation proposed by Democrats and
¿Cómo se puede
Republicans in the current
hacer esta
session of
propuesta
the
por
Connecticut
demócratas y
General
republicanos
Assembly
por la
address student mental
Asamblea
health?
de Connecticut
And
para
keep in
hablar
mind
de la
that
salud
student
mental
groups
de
at
los
Norwalk
estudiantes?
High School and Brian McMahon High School submitted
Y
proposals to
la
the State
propuesta que se han
Department of
hecho sobre
Education
diferentes
to address
escuelas
the mental
que
health
se han hecho
concerns
a
of
través
students in
del
grade 9
Estado
through
para
12.
que los estudiantes
We
de
know you're
9 a
busy,
12
but we urge
sabemos
you
que
to
están
meet with
ocupados,
students
pero necesitamos que
for
pongan los
firsthand
estudiantes
feedback
tiempo
about our academic and
para
emotional success
hablar
in the face
de
of
lo que
mental
va a
health
ser
challenges
éxito
that have pushed
académico
some of our
y
classmates to the
emocional para
outskirts of hope.
seguir
Show your
ayudando
support
y
for the
que nos
students of
puedan
Norwalk and please negotiate with the Board of
poder
Education in
negociar con
good
la
faith.
Junta de Educación.
Thank you for your time.
Y gracias por su tiempo.
Thank you. Why don't we keep going? I see
Vamos a seguir.
3 more hands raised. Why don't we take
Próxima
the
cuarta
next
mano.
3 and then we'll go back to
Vamos a tomar la
covering the
próxima
emails
pregunta
that were
y después
submitted
seguimos con
electronically.
los correos
Hey,
electrónicos.
Diana Carpio, you will be allowed to speak.
La próxima persona, por favor.
Good evening, Common Council members and Mayor
Buenas
Reeling.
tardes a todos.
My name is Diana Carpio,
Yo
Vice
soy
Chair
Diana
of the Board of Education.
y
I live at
soy
8
miembro
4th
de
Street.
de
I am
la
speaking to you not
Junta
only
de
as a member
Educación.
of the
Estoy
Board
hablando
of
no
Education,
solamente
but
como
as a mother.
miembro de la Junta de
I
Educación,
was
pero
born
como
and raised
madre.
in Norwalk. I
Yo
went to
nací
Norwalk
en
Public
esta
Schools,
ciudad,
as well as
yo
my
fui a la
son who
escuela pública,
graduated
como
P-TECH last
también
year.
mi hijo es
I
que
have
graduó
always
el año
volunteered at
pasado.
schools
Yo
and at
siempre he
town
sido
events.
voluntaria en la escuela,
I'm not
en
going to
diferentes
spew
eventos.
numbers at you as
No
everyone
voy
else here is doing.
a
And also
hablar
because the multiple
y
meetings
no,
that the
lo que
Common
quiero
Council
decir es,
committee chairs
vamos
and
a
Common
hablar de
Council
los
members
comités,
have
vamos a
attended with the
hablar
Board of Ed.
de los miembros, cómo
Year
han
after
estado
year,
apoyando a la
we
Junta de
fight back and
Educación año
forth.
tras año.
When I say fight, I literally mean
Cuando yo digo
fight for
seguir
funding for
hacia
the children
adelante,
of Norwalk.
cómo podemos empujar para
Misinformation
beneficios de
is spewed
fondo
all over
para
Norwalk.
para los
Fingers are
niños de
pointed
Noa.
all over Norwalk.
Todos
My
los dedos
question to
señalando
you
a
all
Noa. Mi
is,
pregunta para
when was the
todos
last
ustedes
time you funded a
¿cuándo
full
fue la última
education budget?
vez que se
Elected
hizo un
officials
presupuesto
talk about
completo?
how they will
Los
support the school
oficiales electos,
system,
como ellos
how they will fight
quieren
for our
apoyar
children.
la
Yet
educación,
here
como
we
ellos
are
van a
fighting a
luchar
losing
por
battle. And yes,
nuestros
I said
niños. Y aquí
losing
estamos
battle.
perdiendo
Why?
esta
Because
batalla.
I
¿Por
quote,
qué? Porque
children are not worth
porque
that
los
much.
niños
Staff
no,
get paid too
para
much.
ustedes no tienen
Buildings do
mucha
not need all
valor.
of that work.
Los edificios no necesitan
Those are
todo
just
ese
some
trabajo.
examples of what I
Y
hear from
instalaciones. Esas son las
individuals
cosas que
who
yo
are
escucho de
responsible
los
to help
individuos.
fund our
¿Quién es
schools.
responsable para darle
When was the
el
last time
apoyo
any
cuando
one
nuestra
of
escuela?
you
¿Cuándo
have walked
fue la
all the
última
schools,
vez
have
que
sat on
caminaron
a
por
school
las
bus,
escuelas?
have eaten the
¿Cuándo
school
vieron estos
lunch,
buses
or
telefónicos?
have met
¿Cuándo
families families at events with children at Norwalk Public Schools. And let's please not use COVID as an excuse. because I know that before COVID, no one or many of you have not. This pandemic has thrown a wrench at the education system, the country's education system. Last year, we were flat funded. We were told we misused funds, but instead, we legally made changes to continue education in any way possible for our children, stretched every dollar possible, kept the children safe. Staff worked day in and day out. These past few years have not been easy for anyone. How long ago did the city get its AAA rating? Has the city ever lost it since getting that rating? All I'm asking right now is for all of us to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch. Forget about history. Forget about who doesn't like whom. Forget about all the fights. And let's remember the children because they matter and their futures matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
All right, Jodi, you are up next.
Hi, my name is Jodi Sattler. I live at 17 Highland Avenue. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I am the co-chair of the School Governance Council at Brian McMahon High School, and I have 3 children that attend school there. I'm here to advocate for funding the full budget request for the Norwalk Public Schools. And I know you've heard a lot tonight about contractual agreements and investment in our students. And I just want to talk about how important the programs are as an investment. In order for our students to progress and be successful, we need to be consistent, and that means consistent with the budget, as opposed to worrying about if programs are going to get cut every year. The magnet programs are a great example that we can all wrap our head around as to how funding our school budget is an investment for the future. And I will use the Center for Global Studies as an example. It was started back in 1992. It is still successful to this day. The International Baccalaureate program at Brian McMahon High School is another good example of the program that we need to keep building for student success through fully funding this budget. Right now, students have the opportunity to take IB classes during junior and senior year. And this program provides support, rigor, focuses on future-ready students for both college and postgraduate careers. It is inclusive and puts the focus on the students working in a collaborative environment, which helps to close the achievement gap and increase engagement for all students who participate. I personally have 2 children in the program, and I have been really impressed with everything they've been doing. We've now applied for the middle years program, which would add 9th and 10th grade to the IB program at McMahon. And the application is in progress, and a middle years coordinator has been hired. But we need to fund this so we can expand it to include more students, including those at Norwalk High. And I know IB is going to be a focus in our district moving forward as long as we can continue to support it. The success of the 9th through 12 program at McMahon will provide the groundwork for future IB classes in middle and elementary schools. We have seen the impact, and we know the impact of magnet learning at Columbus, Global Studies, Silvermine, and PONUS. So please continue to fund the NPS budget for future generations, because we know this is a great investment for the students in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodi.
All right, Astro, hopefully it will work this time. You should be able to unmute now.
Hola, buenas noches.
Hola.
Mi nombre es Astrid Cisneros, vivo en 84 Main Street. Yo les agradecería y les ruego que por favor aprobaran lo que están pidiendo, porque yo creo que la importancia es la educación de los niños, porque si no aprueban eso, va bajando el presupuesto, van quitando programas, van quitando personal. Entonces, es algo que afectaría muchísimo a los niños. Yo tengo mi hija que está en Silvermine y afectaría a todos los niños de Norwalk. Y yo les ruego, por favor, que deberían como de ser un poquito conscientes sobre, porque yo me imagino que no es más prioridad la educación de los niños que otra cosa. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Gracias. Thank you, Astro. Next one up.
Last one, Annie, you will be allowed to talk.
Buenas noches. Mi nombre es Anika David, madre de estudiante de primer grado de Silverman y dirección es 84 West Avenue, Norwalk. La idea de un excelente presupuesto académico es que luego los maestros también estén motivados a prestar una excelente labor, ya que deben de estar bien remunerados. Aparte de eso, lo más importante es la estabilidad emocional y académica de los niños, donde con este presupuesto se tendrá que mermar muchas actividades u oportunidades culturales, emocionales, sociales para niños. Otra cosa importante, el programa EXCEL para niños que no hablan inglés o que están en proceso de aprendizaje con el idioma inglés. Entonces sería importante no mermar esa cantidad de presupuesto. Aparte de eso, solicitar que ciertos aportes económicos en las escuelas que muestren más claridad en situaciones escolares. Me ha parecido muy exitoso los programas que hay para familias hispanas en las escuelas públicas de Norwalk. Obviamente uno quisiera tener los hijos de uno en instituciones privadas, pero pues el presupuesto económico familiar no alcanza y hay instituciones magnet donde también prestan una excelente participación académica. Entonces, por eso no es bueno que nos quiten ese beneficio que tenemos a los padres y a los hijos, que queremos que sean unos hijos exitosos, que sean unos hijos que son hijos que les gusta estudiar, que les gusta participar en procesos escolares. Entonces no es una buena decisión. Creo que también es importante velar por la parte emocional y familiar, y esto va también de la mano desde dentro de las escuelas como dentro del hogar. Muchas gracias, hasta luego.
I'm so sorry. Can I just interrupt? Could the translator please translate for the panelists, the previous two comments?
If you have your translations on English, you'll get the translation.
Thank you. I see one more hand raised. Why don't we take that and then we'll resume with Chisame reading the emails that were sent in.
All right, Katya, you should be able to.
You're still muted.
And if you see a little red dash over the microphone, if you want to click that before you speak, that'll allow you to be heard.
Okay, might be experiencing some technical difficulty. So why don't we move on, Chitsame? You want to move on to the next email that was sent in.
Christine Richmond, 45 Stony Brook Road. Hi, everyone. Please have my comments read into the public record. Thank you. And let me know if there's any identifying information I have left out that may be needed. I'm a parent of a Norwalk Public School kindergartner. I also recently purchased a house in Norwalk, and I'm excited to put down roots and raise my kids here while investing in the community. I believe strongly that a well-funded and well-run school system benefits all residents, even if they don't have school-age children. I'm writing to let you know that I feel a 3.75% increase in education funding falls very short of what's needed, especially since last year saw no increase. What cuts are you proposing to bridge the gap? They will be substantial and will limit the opportunities our school kids deserve to have access to. I'm also concerned and confused about how many educators' salaries are ESSER funded. How will we continue to pay those salaries when those funds aren't available? I'm new to the Norwalk Public School budgeting process, but from what I've been learning, many Norwalk Public School parents feel it's a yearly battle to try to get our schools properly funded. People have a lot of unanswered questions. Why, with so much recent commercial real estate development and a booming housing market, does Norwalk struggle year after year to fund the school budget? Also, why is this important meeting happening during a school vacation break? And why was there another important meeting scheduled yesterday at 5:30, a time that's impossible for most working parents when it could have been scheduled weeks ago? COVID has, of course, made communication much more challenging, but there needs to be much better transparency to this process. There's way too much confusion across the board and no real sense of a solid plan to get our schools back on track. And it's our kids who bear the brunt of this. I ask you to please come at these budget discussion with a fresh set of eyes. The goal should be to give Norwalk school children a top-tier education that sets them up to achieve whatever goals they envision for themselves. Investing in Norwalk's future benefits us all. Thank you. Daria Guzman, Barbara Drive. Dear all, I am a resident of East Norwalk, Council District C, with 1, soon to be 2 small children in Norwalk Public School. I have concerns about the budget that is being proposed and want to take this opportunity to share them with you. I thank you in advance for your time and consideration. It is unacceptable that year after year, our city cannot support the school budget. This is a core issue that is not being addressed, at least in a visible and meaningful way to the community. How is it possible that we end up at this same place year after year? Who is asking and addressing that question? With the constant development in the city of Norwalk, how is it possible that we still cannot adequately fund our schools, and year after year, parents have to fight for what our children both need and deserve? A 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate. Such an increase will not cover current contractual obligation at 4.5% and fails to take into account the depletion of federal funds that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs in this past year. What of those obligations would then need to be cut, and what is the impact on our students? We cannot cut critical services. We cannot cut critical staff. Our children have suffered greatly in many areas as a result of the pandemic. Severe learning loss, increased mental health issues, social emotional challenges, and much, much more. This is not the time to cut in areas that are desperately needed for our children to thrive and feel normal again. The joint meeting of the Common Council and Board of Ed felt very haphazardly scheduled with very little advance notice to the community. In years past, these meetings have been part of the equation early on. Going forward, regular working meetings between the two groups should take place so that there is a transparent and productive working relationship between the two, with parental and taxpayer involvement where appropriate. Please do not let our children down by underfunding the budget. I'll be watching the meeting tomorrow evening and ask that my concerns be entered into the public record. Edward Phillip, 12 Burlington Drive. Good afternoon. I am writing today to share my concerns over the proposed 2022-2023 funding for the public schools and recent comments made by the CFO of the city. First, I would like to address the comments made by Mr. Dakowitz regarding the city isn't getting a good enough ROI from the Norwalk Public School. Beyond the fact that this is insulting to the children, parents, and teachers in Norwalk, it is clear he doesn't get the point of funding for education. Additionally, the statement released by the mayor distancing himself from the offensive comments is basically worthless as long as Mr. Dakowitz remains involved in budget discussion involving funding for our school. So either the mayor truly believes that funding for education should be based on test scores or rate of return, or he will remove Mr. Dakowitz from the budget process and live up to the statement he released late last week. Let's not forget the right to a free education is protected by the Connecticut State Constitution. And the last I checked, it doesn't include a return on investment or test score clause. Additionally, a 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable to my family, and most importantly, my two daughters that attend Norwalk Public School. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation and fails to account for the drop off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. So essentially, the city is forcing the schools to make cuts that will affect my children, such as athletics. My rising senior is a 2-sport letter winner, and my rising 8th grader would have another year of no middle school sports. Facilities, my daughter was forced to use a toilet without a toilet seat at West Rocks yesterday. The good news is she said the room was wider than a prison toilet. And special education, more on that later. We are willing to accept higher taxes, whatever level they may be, for quality educational service and a more robust commitment that directly benefits all of our children and resets these budgets for subsequent years. If we want to go back to Mr. Dakowitz's rate of return concept, an investment in our school will pay off for the residents of the city beyond test scores, but with the increased property values. Family wants to live in communities with great schools and would pay extra for that. Let's not be short-sighted on this. The Common Council and Board of Ed need to have regular working meetings throughout the year to develop a more committed, transparent, and productive relationship that benefits our children. Why the budget process has become adversarial is beyond me. Last I checked, everyone on the email was elected to serve their constituents' best interests. Can someone explain to me how infighting accomplished that? I also don't understand how it's okay for the city budget to increase at a greater rate, let alone how the CFO could explain with a straight face how he needed more staff. I'd like to hear the rate of return on that investment. Trust me, reports can be a little late, taxes process a little slower, and not one taxpayer would be hurt. As a former municipal employee, not Norwalk, I know the games that is played. No one looks to save money as they will never get it back in their budget going forward. So instead of managing hard, creating incentive to save money, all to benefit the taxpayer, the CFO strategy is to pit one side against the other and hope we don't notice. We have one party rule in the city, partly because registered Democrats outnumber registered Republican, but also because on a national level, the Republicans have gone off the rails. Don't get too comfortable, because at the end of the day, all politics are local. And if you continue to make decisions that hurt my children or family, I will have no choice but to support any candidate that opposes you in the next election. Lastly, the Norwalk Public School Special Education Department saves lives. This isn't hyperbole, it's a fact. Children are dealing with so much these days, and the support system that have been put in place by the schools have allowed children to attend and thrive in school when they might not have been able to do so otherwise. Any cuts to special education funding could be life-threatening for the young people in our community. Failure to properly fund the Norwalk Public School budget will result in cuts that will hurt children in ways that they might never recover. I could go on further, but you get the point. Education in this city needs to be properly funded, and the current 3.75% is inadequate, and the current adversarial relationship between the city and Norwalk Public School needs to improve immediately. That's what I expect from my elected official, and I plan to hold everyone accountable for these expectations. I like this email to be read into the public record, and I would further like my Common Council representative to be the one to read it. Edward Phillip. Jennifer Fritz Romano, 41 Wolf Pit Ave, 7B. Hello, my name is Jennifer Fritz Romano, and I live at 41 Wolf Pit Ave, 7B, voting district C1, and would like this to be read as part of the public comment in tonight's meeting. As many Norwalk citizens are, I'm exhausted to be having the same budget discussion year after year to fight for our children and our schools. We need a better plan moving forward. It shouldn't be a crisis every budget season, but rather a considered, thoughtful, and ongoing process. Couldn't the Common Council and Board of Ed meet throughout the year on such an important topic? Until that happens, here we are. A 3.75% increase in education funding is not adequate or acceptable, knowing the contract commitments the district has in place and knowing federal funding adjustment that will hit us as well. Could someone please explain the purpose of the mall and other new developments in Norwalk? Were we told that these additions would be addition to our tax base and help with our city budgets? Yet here we are again looking to make cuts to our children, our future instead. And worst of all, it's coming out of pandemic when we know more focused education and support services will be needed. Jessica Garnett, 17 Lakewood Drive. I would like to have my District D representative read this email into the record, please. A 3.75% increase in education funding is not acceptable to me as taxpayer, parent, and engaged citizen of Norwalk. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation and will force staffing and program cuts. It also fails to account for the drop off of federal ESSER dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs during the last budget cycle. As a taxpayer, I'm always willing to accept a moderate tax increase to see that the necessary funding is in place to educate the children of Norwalk. Over the last 2 years of COVID, we have asked a lot of our children, our most vulnerable children, have been impacted in ways we can't even quantify yet. Now is not the time to skimp on their education. We cannot ask our teachers to continue to do more with less. Teachers are leaving the profession in droves. We need to be mindful that they be given all the tools they need to help our children achieve. The city constantly touts projects such as Waypoint, Head of the Harbor, and the Sono Mall for the tax revenue they bring to the city. Yet year after year, we are told that we can't afford to educate our children or run our city services. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. We can't welcome children into our city and then refuse to provide funds to educate them. I truly hope you will look at all means available to provide the Board of Ed with their budget asks. Jessica Herlihy, 39 Walter Avenue. Dear council members, I am writing to you to confirm the importance of investing in our children's education. While unfortunate comments were made stating that there is no return on investment, there are certainly dire financial consequences for not choosing to invest in our future adult residents. I work as Director for Career Readiness in a local non-for-profit, and I have conducted recent research in the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on marginalized populations and the impact on the future of the workforce in Connecticut. If we do not invest in these children, research shows that our future will include an increase in housing instability, a decrease in public safety and infrastructure, and a deterioration of public health. The strength of our city and state economy is inextricably tied to the financial stability of its residents. If we don't invest in our children now, they will not have a chance to become career ready and financially stable adults. My work also provides me with the insight that there is never enough funding to go around and that we must be creative in our planning and usage. I do understand the difficulty of the position that you are in. I can only ask that you consider the future consequences on not acting proactively in education and supporting Norwalk's youth, and do your best to meet the Board of Education's ask. The 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable, especially as we see the cost of goods and services skyrocketing. My children are good test takers, extremely resilient, and have support system that I could only dream of growing up. They can still thrive in the face of everything happening since March of 2020. Still, in order for all children to have that same experience, I am personally willing to accept slightly higher taxes. My understanding that the range is between $13 to $30 a month. Correct me if inaccurate, for a more vigorous and equitable commitment. I listened to our city CFO statement last week and read his statement to clarify and apologize. While some would like his resignation, I would like his understanding to inform better choices. I would ask for him to spend some time with the neediest populations and see how they live, see how they need to beg for services that the schools are required to provide by law, but don't have enough funding and staffing to adequately provide. Then perhaps he can better understand the future return on investment. Thank you for your time and consideration. Judy McNulty, 15 Sunset Hill Ave. Members of the Common Council, I have a child who is a junior at P-Tech Norwalk and has been a Norwalk Public School student since kindergarten. During that time, the district has seen a significant shift in the demographic of the student population. The change is welcome. As a community, Norwalk has a proud history of diversity and inclusion, and my child has benefited greatly from learning alongside children whose ethnicity, first language background, and home life do not necessarily mirror their own. We are also encouraged that the district has shown a great awareness and sensitivity to pediatric mental health issues and have made great stride in accommodations for our LGBTQ and youth. Despite the above, I am saddened to note that while the number of Norwalk Public School students who are ESL learners and or who may be identified as requiring interventions, counseling, or social services has grown exponentially, Norwalk Public School has a deficit in the number of specialized and support personnel necessary to meet the needs of those children. In fact, during the time my children has been a Norwalk Public School student, budget cuts and lack of funding have necessitated the elimination of numerous invaluable personnel, paraprofessionals, reading specialists, counselors, secretaries, and administrators, to name a few. We, as a district, have weathered those losses, but not without consequences. And the lack of help where help has been needed has taken a toll on children, families, and overburdened Norwalk Public School staff. It was becoming clear prior to COVID that we were nearing a tipping point and that at some point the situation would become unsustainable. That point is now. Our children are in crisis. Having lost over a year of their childhood, they are struggling to adjust and catch up. I can speak only anecdotally of the elementary age children and the effect the economic has had on literacy and numeracy skills, but experts tell us that most will never make up the lost time. As for the older children, it seems to be the norm now for them to be depressed, anxious, and cynical. They are socially uncomfortable and painfully aware of everything that they lost out on while in lockdown. Behavior issues are rampant in the schools. Fights break out routinely. Students worry that they will not be prepared for college. Overworked counselors are routinely unavailable to meet the demand for help. Teachers are having a hard time coping. Understaffed and underfunded before the pandemic, our district was ill prepared for the added stress to the system, and the Board of Education now has the inevitable job of determining how to tackle this disaster. They have asked for a large, but under the circumstances, not unrealistic budget increase to mitigate the effects that the pandemic has had on our children, and we as a community have a civic responsibility to accept that financial burden. I ask that the Common Council fully fund the Board of Ed as requested and that a plan is put in place to continually collaborate to ensure that the needs of our youngest citizen continue to be met.
May, why don't you take a break? I see one hand raised in the chat, so why don't we allow that speaker to share their comments, and then we'll go back to reading the submitted emails.
All right, Katia, you'll be allowed to talk.
Hello, good evening. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. My daughter is in high school, last year, senior. She is very vocal about the issues that they have to face every day. Right now, we all talk about the budget and all the importance of having money available for our kids and our teachers. She was telling me how, like, the minimum things, for example, she has to go to the bathroom and someone has to hold the door because they don't have locks. That is unacceptable. That cannot be happening, because that transmits a message for the kids that they are not worth it. They don't deserve to have better. And that is what is translated in the test, and how they are able to express their feelings, how they are succeeding in life every day. They feel less when you hear them talking about, oh, we're gonna go and play against Greenwich, Diane, whatever. They feel less. Why they feel less? Because the environment that they are in is not the best. We teach them that we love them, we care for them, but like how you will feel if you get to your home and everything is broken. Like the teachers are worried because they don't have what they need to teach. I beg you for them to have an opportunity. You are the ones that can make that happen. And we love our children. We really love this city. And if we have to pay a little bit more in taxes, so be it. My name is Katia Salas. I live 245 Flax Hill Road. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Chitsime, back to you.
Justin Matley, 4 Cindy Lane. Good evening. Thank you for giving me a couple of minutes of your time. I presume everyone in this room entered public service with the idea of working collaboratively for the benefit of its citizens. That is why in the near decade I lived in Norwalk, it's become increasingly bothersome why the Common Council and Board of Education cannot work more often and more closely together to ultimately treat high quality public education as a right and not a commodity. The distrust is palpable and the language, skepticism, and annual cycle must stop. I have no doubt everyone in this room is well-meaning in their aim for a reasoned, fair budget that consider all cities' needs. But the demographics and population are changing in Norwalk, and robust investment in the operating expenses of schools and educators is more paramount than ever. COVID exacerbated the need for these investments, and while the city was able to levy tax relief and take an additional projects due to its share of federal relief, the schools had to use massive amounts of these resources just to remain afloat. The council acknowledges this dichotomy and yet has no answer for relieving the burden when it's gone. It's unacceptable. I ask for a restore faith on both sides of this discussion for the betterment of the generation we are raising. I have been under tremendous stress and anxiety raising 2 children during these times, and I have been grateful for the relief, support, and learning environment Norwalk Public School has provided. My wife has been working in Norwalk Hospital throughout the pandemic. My oldest daughter has undergone periodic depression and anxiety related to the pandemic, and I have failed like a half-present father, juggling everything to try and ease the burden on my spouse to keep our kids above water. In the end, 3.75% does not get us there. It simply does not. I have read the details, and what it covers does not fulfill the very basic needs of our children. And even so, why are we going for basic? Why is that enough? We are a middle-class family with 2 working parents, one in education and the other in healthcare, and are ready to pay more to know that the city's most ample and most vulnerable are provided a world-class education. I will take my vote and my residence elsewhere if the cities cannot amend its vision and support for Norwalk's youngest. We need to reset the level at which we sustain the support so that I humbly request a fair compromise that both meets all contractual needs of the city and beyond, that invests further in the programming and staff needed to sustain the recovery following loss of federal dollars, and sets a new baseline for Norwalk's education outlook in post-pandemic world. I am very appreciative of your time and effort in this regard. Lisa Dune, 14 Inglewood Road. Dear Norwalk leaders, first, I thank you for your efforts on behalf of our city and our school. I sincerely understand the challenges you face. I write to you today as a 25-year veteran public school educator, counselor in both Los Angeles and New York, as well as longtime parent and community member here in our cherished Norwalk community. I write with concern that the 3.75 budget increase will not adequately support our students and our staff in a time of great need. I remember with fondness our decision to move to Norwalk in the spring of 2007. Our eldest was just getting ready to begin kindergarten the following fall. Our middle daughter had just turned 1, and our youngest, with just a twinkle in our eye,
Y ha
did not give too much thought to schools at that time, feeling confident that our local public school system would work hard to serve our 3 children and to serve all children in our community. As a public school educator, I must believe this. Thank you for indulging my short trip down memory lane. My daughter are now a freshman in college, a sophomore in high school, and a 7th grader in middle school. They are proud of their experiences in Norwalk Public Schools. However, recently, there has been a tone of concerns among the remaining 2. They share their peers' apprehension about using the restrooms at school, mentioned fights in the schools. They also share their fears after the multiple school threats this fall. Both girls are not timid, and I have weathered other challenges. So I have taken note of these new worries. When I inquired, I learned that there may not be enough staffing to provide adequate supervision, and that a school resource officer is shared between schools and not present full-time. I imagine some other integral support staff may be eliminated in the future if funding is not available, such as counselor and intervention aides who can proactively address student issues before they arise. I know firsthand the value of compassionate adults and strong leaders in school building. I also know how difficult it is to meet all the budget funding needs to make adequate staffing happen. I am on the front line of this reality and these discussions in my work, and I try to be as knowledgeable as I can about our local needs in Norwalk. I work on the SGC at McMahon for a few years, so I truly am aware that asking for more staffing is not a small request and that the challenges are system-wide. But the fallout for not having sufficient supervision, staffing, and programming is a far-reaching, now more than ever. This is not just a Norwalk issue. It exists in most large public schools, but I think Norwalk leaders can help remedy it. I am concerned that the proposed 3.75% increase in education funding will stunt student progress as we address COVID learning loss, that it will eliminate some of the classes and activities that make school fun, and that it will not be enough to support our educators. If ever there was a time to supplement our students, our schools, and our human resource, instead of diminishing or simply sustaining, the time is now. If there is any way to increase the funding or to shift our research to ensure that our Norwalk students, program, and staff are buoyed, I hope it will be considered. To that end, I am willing to accept slightly higher taxes in order to better serve Norwalk students and to support our educators. The investment in our students and our adults is worth every penny.
Tishman, if you could just pause for a second. David, Councilmember Hooverman, you indicated that there's some concern with the translator?
No, I got a couple of text messages that apparently the translation on YouTube is over the top of the speaker speaking.
Tyler or
This is from
Larry, is
people
there any?
that are watching on YouTube right now, not people who are on the Zoom feed, on the YouTube feed.
I'll defer to the IT team. Is there anything you can do to address that?
Yeah, I'll check it out right now to see if I can get that fixed.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Tyler, I would recommend, I see Tomas, he keeps showing up when he's speaking. I did go in and check in the translation room, and one time I heard him speaking over the speaker, and the next time I went in, I only heard Tomas. So maybe you can take him out and then put him back in the Spanish translation room.
Okay, I'll do that right now.
Thank you.
But Larry, it's happening on the YouTube feed, not on the Zoom feed.
Yes, I thank you. I understand that, but for some reason, he's the only translator that when he speaks, I see the yellow come up around his, it must have happened when we had to take everyone out and then put the Creole translators in.
Okay, so I took him out, now he's back. So
okay,
still persists.
All right, I'll go and listen to the YouTube while we continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Titsime, back to you.
Leah Nora Lovett, 11 Jackson Drive. We reside at 11 Jackson Drive in Norwalk and have a daughter at Nathan Hale. Our children are the future of the city and nation, and you should be fighting on their behalf for every last cent to help them, especially after the last 2 years as they've dealt with COVID and at-home learning, hybrid learning, and now finally back to a 5-day in-school week. They have lost so much and they cannot afford to lose any more. Their teachers have been instrumental in getting them back on track, and they have a long road ahead. We can't continue to lose our most valuable resources. A 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable, especially when you consider all the damage done from COVID. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation and fails to account for the drop-off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. We are willing to accept slightly higher taxes. Between $13 and $30 a month is the range in play here for a median family, for a more robust commitment that directly benefits all of our children and resets their budgets for subsequent years. The Common Council and Board of Ed need to have regular working meetings throughout the year to develop a more committed, transparent, and productive relationship that benefits our children. We need a clear plan from the city moving forward on how they are going to support our schools. We cannot go from budget crisis to budget crisis. The city touts housing development, bringing tax revenue to the city, but year after year, we can't afford to run the city. I like our comments read into the records tonight. Maria.
For the record, YouTube is back to normal.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you,
appreciate that.
Maria Iacono Maldonado, 18th Avenue. Good afternoon. I am writing to address the budget situation in Norwalk Public Schools and ask that my comments and concern be added to public record for the next meeting. I would like to ask that those in charge of creating and approving the budget do so thoughtfully, taking the children and teachers into account when doing so. I am the parent of 3 children in the Norwalk Public School system, and it is important to me that the budget is not shortchanged and that the children and teachers have the supports they need in place, whether it is for special education, speech, language development, and even social, emotional education and awareness. On a personal note, and as an example, my son is currently in 1st grade and tells me often that there are 2 children in his class that have hit his teachers, destroy school property, and one day he came home and said that one of the children injured his teacher and she was crying afterward. He does not have 2 teachers in this classroom, but obviously additional supports are needed for the children in his class, not only for the ones that need the behavior interventions, but also for the rest of the children that are exposed to such things and are having their learning disrupted. Funding adequately can provide all schools with the staffing and specialists they need so that all children can make the most out of their educational experiences. A 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation and fails to account for the drop-off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. The children in our city are our greatest resource, a resource that cannot be measured in dollars, in land acquisition, in the numerous apartment buildings, or even in grades on a report card. We know that the children in the city do not all start on a level playing field when it comes to learning, especially when you have children for whom English is a second language or for those that need additional learning supports. The success of our children means the success of us all as a community, and funding our education system should be our top priority, along with providing education that is equitable for all. Going forward, I believe that it would be beneficial if all meetings regarding the school budgets be presented in a way that makes it easier for all families who have a stake in this can understand, because adamantly much of it can be confusing. Families should be aware of exactly where funding is going for our schools and how a lesser budget would affect our children. Conversely, we should also be made aware of grants and increases in budget money and how they are being used to benefit our children. We pay a lot of taxes to live in Norwalk, and my family and I often toy with the idea of leaving for a town with lower taxes, but I grew up here and I have a love for Norwalk. I know many others do as well. I want to see us succeed as a community, and I want all of our children to succeed also. What is the point of welcoming so many new families to the area with all these fancy apartments that are going up seemingly on every corner when we cannot say that we are investing all that we can into the children that live here? Melissa Dino, 22 Knollwood Road. Dear Mayor Rilling, Common Council members, and members of the Board of Education, I am writing as a parent of a 10th grader at the Center for Global Studies to express my concern that the Norwalk Public School budget will not be funded at the level needed for student success, particularly in this historic time where so many families have been impacted by the pandemic. I found it so upsetting to hear Mr. Dakowitz's comments from last week on the lack of ROI in funding our schools. It's really frustrating to hear people express this sentiment when comparing Norwalk to neighboring towns, that our students don't perform as well. Of course, the city district with students of many different social economic demographic with multi-language learners and many coming from high-risk backgrounds are not going to perform at the same level as students from some of the most affluent and homogeneous towns in the United States, such as Darien and New Canaan. Yet Norwalk is the best in the state for urban school districts, a fact not often expressed in these conversations. Although I thank Ms. Alterman for reiterating it in the meeting last night, this opinion by Mr. Dakowitz, a city employee, certainly is not in the spirit of a collaborative and productive budget discussion. On behalf of my family, I would like to express that a 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable. This amount doesn't even cover current contractual obligation, which in Tuesday's night meeting was expressed to be 4.5%, and fails to take into account the drop off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. Our family would be willing to pay slightly higher taxes that helps meet the needs of the district, not only for resources, teachers, for those most impacted by the pandemic and the learning loss that has occurred, but in support of better funding for the arts, clubs, and to ensure enough higher level classes are funded at the high school level. My son graduated from Brian McMahon High School in 2020 and actually spoke to Mr. Rilling and the Common Council in 2018 during that year's similarly frustrating budget discussion. Mr. Rilling, I'm not sure if you remember that meeting at City Hall, but Jackson expressed how he was placed in 2 study halls during his critical junior year because of a lack of teacher options for the course he was interested in taking. Attributed to funding budget at that time, one of those was AP Economics. Thankfully, the study halls were finally removed. He took AP Macro, Micro, and eventually went on to major in economics in college. If Jack had been forced to stay in a study hall versus those AP courses, it certainly would not have led him to where he is today. My daughter Ella is benefiting from the incredible programs at the Center for Global Studies. Her classes included honors, Japanese, are rigorous, and community is tight-knit and incredible. We certainly realize that raising taxes is a difficult thing to consider, but this also speaks to a need to seek out more equitable funding. Why is Norwalk's per pupil funding $4,000 less than some nearby town, as was expressed in Tuesday's night's meeting? If the district is being given unfunded mandates and also is grappling with the challenges that are coming during this unprecedented time, doesn't the city recognize that and have an obligation to support this need? To fund not only the bare minimum, which we don't even seem to be at yet, but what will make the district continue to achieve despite the challenges. Our family and friends have wondered with all the recent development in Norwalk, the mall, apartments, which generate more students, Where is the impact and benefit of those projects for our schools? It certainly will not be a positive reflection on the city of Norwalk to have a school district where needs are unmet. I can't imagine a more important or pressing need for the city than fully funding our school. It's not just teachers, resources, classes, interventions, but ultimately it comes down to the future of our students. For some, that might be the first in their family to graduate high school despite living in poverty. For others, it could be to learn to read and flourish despite a learning disability. For some, it is adequately funded arts that leads to future work. And in the case of my son, it is the ability to take a class that leads them on a trajectory to a career path and success. I must disagree with Mr. Dakowitz. Supporting these futures is the best return on investment of all. Natalia, Mila, and Cecil, 2 Fullen Road. I am a parent of a first grader at Wolf Pit Elementary School and an incoming kindergarten for next school year. I would like Mayor Rilling and Chief Financial Office to consider its position on the budget for our schools. Norwalk Public School is asking for a 9.1% increase in funding to be able to better serve our students. I think it's embarrassing and insulting that Chief Financial Officer Henry Dakowitz and Mayor Harry Rilling have only recommended a 3.75% increase. Give our schools and our students what they need to be successful. Stop putting our children in school in Norwalk behind in their education with your poor choices. A 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation, and it fails to account for the drop-off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. I am willing to accept slightly higher taxes for a more robust commitment that directly benefits all of our children and resets these budgets for subsequent years. That's how important education is for my family and what we are willing to do for all of Norwalk students. What are you willing to do for them? As far as I can see, you are willing to continue to deprive them of adequate education and means for them to be successful. The Common Council and Board of Ed need to have regular working meetings throughout the year to develop a more committed, transparent, and productive relationship that benefits our children. Thank you for your time, and I hope you can consider the budget for next year. Paul Wilt. To Mayor Harry Rilling, members of the Common Council, Ms. King, and to members of the Board of Education of Norwalk. My name is Paul Wilt. I reside at 45 Devil's Garden Road. I'm writing you all today to urge all to increase the city's financial commitment closer, if cannot match the Board of Ed's budget requests. I have 2 children in the Norwalk Public School. We have seen a decrease in how our younger son is being challenged academically at Rowan versus his 3-year older brother. We no longer have advanced math class at Rowan. My younger son rarely, if ever, has homework. He is not being prepared like our older son was. For the sake of our community, we have to invest as much as possible to keep and add teachers, assistant teachers, paras. If you shortchange the public school, cuts to arts, extracurriculars, paras, teachers will inevitably force the needs to combine higher needs students into classes with children who are capable of advancing faster. It is not fair to any of them. You cannot make claims that investment in education is a great achievement if during that time the quality of academic rigor goes down for the brightest and the neediest continue to get left behind. I would also like to ask some question born out of my experience in Norwalk Public School. What I read in the local papers, what I read about that is not reported on in the local papers. How is it that we have so many 6-figure administrators in central office, but we have to make sacrifices in the classroom as far as paras and teaching assistants? Why is it we retain a highly paid HR director that hires friends and neglect to do background checks? How can Norwalk taxpayer obtain the complete financials of the Norwalk Public School for our own review? I will finish by stating if I have to pay $15 to $30 extra dollars per year to give teachers more resources to teach more effectively, then I say do it. Thank you for reading my concerns. Sarah McIntee, 6 Susan Court. Dear members of the Common Council and Mayor, the timing of this meeting prevents me from attending in person, but I did want to submit public comments to be read out loud into the meeting minutes. Below are my comments, and thank you in advance for reviewing and discussing them. My name is Sarah McIntee, and I reside at 6 Susan Court. This year marks my 5th year as a resident in Norwalk, Connecticut. As many of you know, I have been an active participant in this process since moving here, frequently making public comments at these meetings and emailing my concerns to various elected officials. And yet again, I find myself questioning how we got here. We once again find ourselves in the position where City Hall says, we support the school, we've increased the budget more than any other administration, and yet it clearly isn't enough. Our kids are falling behind, and COVID has only exacerbated these issues. It seems that we use the same talking points year after year. We talk about efficiency studies and how the budget can never be decreased, while simultaneously failing to make progress where it matters most, in the classroom. Except this year is different. The stakes are higher, and decisions made next week will decide if kids have access to much needed services and how many staff may lose their job when the federal funding runs out. I absolutely sympathize with the concerns about increasing taxes. I understand there is a point when tax becomes too high for our taxpayer to bear, and it cannot be ignored, and that the current tax base permits the city to amass a hefty rainy day fund to the tune of 72 million. This is money that we are sitting on while simultaneously failing our children, but not investing in them. And really, as we pointed out in a recent Finance Committee meeting, the difference in the increase we are talking about are anywhere from $13 to $30 per month. To many, these increases would be barely noticeable, but to the schools, they would make incredible differences. Even I was shocked by some of the information presented by the principal of West Rock Middle School. The idea that 2/3 of our students are not even grade level in math and 50% are not grade level in reading is astounding and also terrifying as a parent. We as a community are doing a disservice to these children if we don't take the steps necessary to improve these outcomes. I know the asks from the schools feel large. A 9% increase is substantial, but we need to keep in mind that this increase includes a request to make up federal ESSER funds that had to be allocated last year to cover costs as a result of the council flat funding the district and not increasing their budget. I am also hopeful that if the efficiency study is productive and recommends new and unique ways to address some of these issues on both the city side and Norwalk Public School. I don't know where you will land on these very challenging issues. I am heartened by the joint meeting that occurred yesterday. I think this discussion can help the parties on both sides of the table work together to try and tackle these very complex issues. I remain hopeful that the council will hear the needs of our school and that when you vote on Tuesday, the amount allocated will be much closer to the original Board of Ed ask than to the proposed 3.75% by Mr. Dakowitz. But regardless of this vote, I urge you to remember that we still have a long way to go and these issues will not solve themselves. If we do not fund the school adequately this year, it will only cascade to next year, making the ask even more intolerable. Education is expensive, and our community is seeing the effect of the significant achievement gap that exists in Connecticut. We cannot keep kicking the can down the road and hoping that next year things will suddenly improve or less funding will be needed. Engaging in these conversations year-round needs to be a priority with a long-term goal of not only improving outcomes, but making Norwalk a city people want to live and raise their children in. And hopefully one that those children return to as adults to raise their own family. As a parent, a taxpayer, and a citizen, I can think of no better investment in our city and in our property values than investing in the schools. Thank you. Tori Ferreira, to whom it may concern, I am a lifelong resident of Norwalk with 2 children currently attending the Norwalk Public School. I feel that the 3.75% increase is unacceptable. It fails the students across our city. That percentage increase does not even cover contractual obligation. Moving forward, there needs to be more meetings between the Common Council and the Board of Ed, and not only during budget season. We need to work together. Educating the children in our city is an important part of our community, and the budget increase needs to reflect that. Please support our schools. Thank you. Tracy Barkley, COVAV. Dear Mayor, council members, and Board of Education members, as a parent of 3 kids and the 2 youngest at second years in high school, I write as an experienced parent. As a Norwalk resident for over 16 years, I am also an experienced taxpayer. I have watched as my kids were experimented on with a myriad new curriculum for mathematics, had parents cut from classes, security cut from school, tables and desks overcrowded on a regular basis, and athletics given the boots, and watch helplessly as the city constantly has refused to support education. I have written extensively, met with various superintendents over the years, attend Board of Ed meetings, Common Council meetings, and serve in every school my kids have attended. Now, as the youngest head for the finish line, my concern for education for Norwalk's children does not wane. While most of my memories of Norwalk Public School have been beautiful, some of my most heartbreaking moments come from attending athletic games where our deficiency in spending seemed to show the strongest. Except those with access to usually expensive private travel programs, our students rarely are able to compete with schools in the region because they lack training, team experience, discipline, and often lose competition simply because they have not the experience. With one of my kids on the track team, they often overheard that Norwalk kids are the laughingstock of larger competitions. If you've never been a parent of a kid with that kind of experience, you can't understand the pain nor the impossibility of encouraging your kids to try something new. If you're thinking this budget is not about athletics, think again. Mayor, if you had kids even remotely athletic, you might not have allowed athletics to die in middle school. My children benefited from their 3rd grade strings program, perhaps one of the brightest co-star on the Norwalk Public School report card. Music is important for brain development, and teachers an appreciation for the arts and humanities. Please do not allow cuts to this important program, which also allow children without means to access something they could never would have otherwise. It is time to stand up to the teachers union. While I will always support our teachers, I cannot support the consistent and guaranteed raises, the pensions and benefits that are not afforded to most of the population. If you want to take, you must be willing to give. There has been hardly a year since we have had our kids in the school system where the teachers have made concessions. Most of us have taken huge salary hits, pay exorbitant amounts for medical care with astronomical deductibles, and have little or no pension. To the Common Council, I beg that you consider value of residency in Norwalk if you don't invest more heavily in the education of our children. Education is not just the learning of skills, but the access to programs for every child and their way of learning. A diverse town needs creative and diverse learning for our youngest citizen, not just academically, but emotional, physical, nurturing that will lead to success in adulthood. When I heard Mr. Dakowitz use the term return on investment in terms of our student achievements, I cannot not help but shake my head. He must not know any of our precious children, and I took that comment personally and was extremely insulted. Do the right thing and support his determination. To our mayor and council, please fully fund this school budget. For those of you that recently ran as pro-school, this is what you owe your constituents. I will accept a justified increase in taxes to support the school. This is for the record.
Just as a reminder, anyone that has dialed into the Zoom that wishes to speak, you can raise your hand electronically and we will acknowledge you if you wish to speak, and we will provide you with 3 minutes to provide your input. So just wanted to provide that reminder. Thank you, Chitsime.
Tyler Fairbairn, 35 King Street. Good evening, members of the Common Council. I am back again this year asking for your support in allocating funding to Norwalk Public School. that is responsible to the taxpayers of Norwalk while also providing teachers and principal with the financial resources they need to continue carrying out what is perhaps the single most important function of municipal government. CFO Henry Dakowitz's comment at the council's February 10th meeting have been mostly derided, and rightfully so, but I would be remiss to not point out that other municipal services, a dog park, a senior center, a fill pothole, do not provide a return on investment in the Econ 101 understanding of the phrase. As a community, we set priorities and understand that you can't pay taxes a la carte. The return on investment we get from adequately funding our school is giving children among the most vulnerable members of Norwalk an opportunity to have a decent, fulfilling life. School is a haven for some of our students, a chance to socialize, make connections with adults that may be lacking in their home life, and address emotional and educational needs that would otherwise be unmet. For some kids, school breakfast, lunch may be the only time they are eating during the day, as is the case every year. I understand that it's difficult, if not impossible, to fund the entire request of the Superintendent Board of Education. But I would ask that you support a minimum 5% increase in order to meet the bare minimum contractual obligation needed to support our teachers, particularly in light of the short-sighted decision to offer zero increase in last year's budget. I think it is also important to note that the Superintendent and Board of Ed can do better throughout this process as well. The joint meeting of the Board of Ed and Council this week left me with more questions than answers. How many central office staff members are being rolled into the direct school support line in their budget? How many, and specifically which staff members were put onto ESSER fund last year? Were any central office staff put on ESSER funds? If not, why? After the budget process has completed, will the Board of Ed share exactly how its increase was used in a clear, concise manner, showing that all of the funding went to direct support for teachers? Finally, I hope that the city is able to find a way to provide funding to the Department of Public Works, Recreation, and Parks to maintain the athletic fields used by so many in the community. The condition of our baseball fields over the last 2 to 3 years have been embarrassing, but no fault of their staff that actually maintains them. As I understand it, there simply aren't enough people to address all of the work that needs to be done. This is a small investment that will provide numerous return in the form of space for kids to play and develop. Thank you for your time. Nalini Jones. A commitment to education and to our children begins with a commitment to the school budget, especially in this post-pandemic landscape when schools have been so strained and students have additional learning needs. I fully support the funding of the school budget. Thank you. Sal Novoa, 41 Taylor Ave. Good morning. I am a parent of a young child with special education who is a dual language learner. I believe the budget needs to be revised. I would hate for my child to lose his opportunity for better his education. For this, I believe it is unfair that there will be only a 3.7% increase in education funding. This is inadequate and unacceptable for our community. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation. Our priorities need to be the children's education. I am willing to accept slightly higher taxes between $13 and $30 a month for a more robust commitment that directly benefits all our children. Also, the CFO statements last week were unacceptable and that the city should appoint a more appropriate and thoughtful financial representative to lead the education budget discussions. Michelle Tiani. To whom it may concern, a 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable. The Common Council and Board of Ed needs to have regular working meetings throughout the year to develop a more committed, transparent, and productive relationship that benefits our children. Fund the schools with what they need to be successful. Unfortunately, more apartments keep getting built, which brings in more kids, and our school system needs to be able to sustain and grow. Norwalk should be a town people want to raise their kids in, not start thinking about moving out. Why is there such a constant need to fight for kids in this town? It is beyond frustrating. Sarah Waters, 152 Witch Lane. Hope all is well. I'm writing as a Norwalk taxpayer, resident, homeowner for over 20 years, and a parent of 4 children who are currently in Norwalk Public School. Please also add these to the meeting minutes as public comments for the 2/17 meeting, as I will be out of town. I'm writing to advocate for building up the infrastructure for this amazing town, including its most important asset, the public schools. Keeping families happy in Norwalk offers so much return value in terms of quality of life. Resident morale, positive feeling and pride, willingness to stay, invest, live, and spend. Ideally, we need to continue to advocate for our residents' children seeking increased funding from the state and federal government to cover the high needs of urban Norwalk. Darien's reaction to open choice laid this despair. Other towns will not voluntarily share in the cost of education high need student. All need to demand more from the state of Connecticut to help balance the burden. At the same time, since we cannot wait for magical and hope for funding from the state or the federal government, we need to levy local taxes so that we can fully pay for what the city needs, the public schools being an essential and integral part of the city. What percentage comes from the rainy day funding versus tax raises? I care not. I am happy for my taxes to go up so I can be proud to be a part of a great town that supports some amazing kids in Norwalk Public School. I am willing to accept higher taxes for a more robust commitment that directly benefits all of our children and resets these budgets for subsequent years. Please note that the 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable to our family. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation and fails to account for the drop off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. Further, as I have children in the middle school for over 10 years, we are still struggling for funding for supplies in school, sports, and activities, especially in middle school. There are so many unfulfilled needs. It is a great idea for Common Council and Board of Education to have a regular working meeting throughout the year to develop a more committed, transparent, and productive relationship that benefits all of Norwalk's children, families, and residents. Thank you for your time. Maurice Rose, PhD, and Mark Bonacera. Dear Mayor Rilling and Common Council, we write as parents of 2 school-age children, Rowan Middle School and CGS, in strong support of the Board of Ed's requested Norwalk Public School budget. Students need more educational and emotional support now than ever before. Therefore, increased staffing is crucial. Resources need to be allocated to facility as well, not only to building the long-needed neighborhood school in Sono, which
we cannot hear you over the translator.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want me to start over?
Heidi, I'm not sure what your
Somehow
concern
we have
is.
a translator on top.
The Creole translator.
I'm not hearing a translator over her talking at all.
Yeah, we were.
Is that the same issue in YouTube you're referring to?
No.
I'm not hearing any concern in.
You didn't hear it?
No, not in the Zoom.
No, neither did I. I didn't hear that at all.
If you have on the English translation, which some of us do because we were getting the Spanish translated to English, now the Creole is coming in on top of Chitsime speaking.
Maybe turn translation off.
Yes.
And you won't get that. Turn it off.
Yes.
Okay, can we proceed now or?
Yes, go ahead, Chitsime.
Okay. Dear Mayor Rilling and Common Council, We write as a parent of 2 school-age children, Rowan Middle School and CGS, in strong support of the Board of Ed's requested Norwalk Public School budget. Students need more educational and emotional support now than ever before. Therefore, increased staffing is crucial. Resources need to be allocated to facilities as well, not only to building the long-needed neighborhood school in Stono, which should have priority over new high school, but the physical plan of middle school are astonishing for the city of Norwalk's means. The Rowan Middle School's bathroom, for example, are disgraceful. Bathrooms that aren't crumbling should be a basic right. This is not luxury. Many families we know have left or are leaving Norwalk because the school lacked the resource and basic amenities of other towns. School must receive the funding they need to support our city's children and future residents. This is a critical investment in our city's future. Anne Radicki, 30 Lockwood Lane. Greetings. My husband and I are 11-year residents and taxpayers of Norwalk with 2 children in the District 1 at Merrimack Elementary and 1 in her first year at Nathan Hale Middle School. My eldest tested in the top 98% nationally, and my youngest received intervention math support to bring her to grade level. They are your spectrum, and I promise you, they are good return on your investment, as is every children you have been elected to represent and support in your city. The words that were delivered by Chief Financial Officer Dakowitz were obviously deeply offensive, but so is the inability for this elected group to recognize that our operating education budget is deplorable and act swiftly and strongly. I was mortified to see the lack of state funding we receive comparatively in a chart circulating in parent groups. Norwalk received $938 per student compared to Hartford's $10,858 per child. While the proposed open choice funding dominating headlines of late results in $4,000 per student going to districts that support the program. That is state money going to other districts to support our students. Are you pressuring Bob Duff and Hartford aggressively to move the needle top down? I have reached out to every television news station in the state about the status of our budget to bring wider public attention to the inequalities and to what is going on tonight in our city. You cannot turn a blind eye to the reality that our schools are grossly underfunded and not substantially amend the budget. While many are focusing on masks, it does not mask the larger problem in our city, and dropping mandates will not fix the education and support gaps needed to address students struggling now more than ever before. Since the pandemic, the increased level of depression, anxiety, reading loss, and social emotional stunting ring as loud as dropping test scores. Our children have lost so much in the last 2 years, and it's been said they are not okay. And it is painfully true, but it is also not okay for our elected officials to turn a deaf ear to the community and education officials advocating for increased fiscal support. Bottom line, what will you do to allocate more of the budget where it is desperately needed? Because a greater Norwalk Public School investment is demanded by the tax-paying family that you serve. Melissa Bramble. There is probably not anything more disheartening than living in a city where the school district isn't supported by the city leaders. It is perhaps the clearest sign that a city is in trouble. While I certainly don't agree with everything our school do and don't do, there is one thing that is clear. They need proper funding to operate and be successful. To say that they are not a good return on investment when talking about our school is deplorable for any person, but from someone who is in a position of power is mind-blowing. And how that comment can then be used to justify not properly funding them is even more disturbing. Every year when budgets are discussed and voted on, Norwalk truly becomes a mockery. The lack of cooperation and support between the different committees and board is mind-boggling. We can't function in a crisis mode from year to year when it comes to funding our schools. There needs to be cooperation between the Common Council and the Board of Education. There needs to be consistent and clear communication through the year between these two groups, with the sole goal being a relationship between the two that benefits our kids in the public school, because ultimately that should be the priority on any and all levels. We need a message and a plan from the city that shows that schools and our kids are a priority, and that there is planning that has been done to account for supporting them at a reasonable rate of increase. 3.75% is not it. I truly hope that we come to point where budget time doesn't bring the feeling of impending doom to every parent of Norwalk Public School student each and every year. Thank you for your time and for your service to Norwalk, which is the place I feel lucky to live. Carrie Stanislausik. Hello. As a parent of a child currently at CGS who has been a part of the Norwalk Public School System, I have very concerned about the discussion by Finance Committee and Common Council members regarding the funding of Norwalk Public School. It is beyond frustrating to be disappointed by the finding year after year when I see all this is lacking in the schools. Even the most basic of needs, hand sanitizers, are often empty and broken. Water fountains are broken or have expired filtering. Over the last couple of weeks, 2 dead rats were found in stairwell at Brian McMahon High School. This doesn't even cover the educational needs. I have included what I would like the council to address and solve immediately below. A 3.75% increase in education funding is inadequate and unacceptable to me. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation and fails to account for the drop off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. I am willing to accept slightly higher taxes. Between $13 and $30 per month is a range in the play here for a median family, for a more robust commitment that directly benefits all of our children and resets these budgets for subsequent years. The Common Council and Board of Ed need to have regular working meetings throughout the year to develop a more committed, transparent, and productive relationship that benefits our children. We need a clear plan from the city moving forward on how they are going to support our school. We cannot go from budget crisis to budget crisis. The city touts housing development, bringing tax revenue to the city, but year after year, we can't afford to run the city. Please support Norwalk Public School and the Board of Ed so that our teacher and student have the resources needed to do their job. Sarah Lemieux. Dear Mayor Rilling and members of the Common Council, hopefully most of you are familiar enough with me to know that I'm not an unreasonable person. I'm familiar with most of you and I consider several of you to be friends. I feel I can confidently say that all of you are progressive, thoughtful individuals who genuinely care about making the world better. I know you're all intelligent and diligent. Knowing this, my cognitive dissonance each year during the budget cycle gets harder and harder to bear. You all know what a strange outlier education funding in the United States is and has been historically and presently. You all know the history of redlining in surrounding communities like New Canaan and Darien. We've been playing catch up with the legacy of segregation since it ended, but in particular since 1988, which was the high point for desegregation in American schools. Real estate value in those towns have gone hand in hand with an almost total lack of diversity. Those towns also fund their students per pupil much more higher than Norwalk, historically and presently and per pupil. I know you know that adds up. Darien, 22,838, New Canaan, 21,898, Westport, 23,348, Norwalk, 19,797 for 2020 and 2021. Every budget cycle since he has been hired, Henry Dakovitz says that Norwalk's test scores are a sign that our school are failing, that our administrators are ineffectively and overpaid, that our Board of Education is full of corrupt liars and fools, and that we're frittering taxpayer money away. Every budget cycle since he has been hired, I have been shocked and saddened by these utterly unnecessary theatrics. If you don't want to fund the school system at the level considered and request it, that's your call to make. However, if that's the case, please just own it honorably. Henry's palpable hostility and vitriol tarnish Norwalk's reputation and make it harder for us all to achieve our mutual goal of a thriving city. I'm sure you all know that testing metrics are not a measure of a child's mind or potential. I'm sure you're all aware of the institutional racism at play in the discussion of American schools generally and Connecticut schools in particular. I'm sure you all know that investment in a child is not only an investment in your community, and that the perception of a robust school system is a huge piece of the actual valuation of a community, but a very concrete investment in the world itself. We are not in good shape as a country, species, or a planet. We need these children of whose futures who have stewardship to get the absolute best education they can, so they can hit the ground running to solve the problems that we couldn't. As hard as we may have tried, this is not abstract or fanciful. It is dangerously real, and we are seeing the consequences of shorting education play out in real time. I genuinely appreciate your time and your service. Ileana Zuniga. Dear Mayor, Common Councilman and Woman, and Board of Education members, I thank you first and foremost for your service to our community, and I also thank you for being open to have a joint meeting tomorrow to discuss the Norwalk Public School budget for next year. Please talk to each other as if your children were sitting in the same room and listening to your words. Civility is the only way forward to achieve a constructive meeting which will benefit our children. I want to ask you all to please keep in mind that a 3.75% increase in education funding is not only enough, but unacceptable to my family. My husband and I would happily pay more taxes if this meant that more of the city's budget go towards our children's education. Finally, I appreciate the mayor and Common Council issuing statement last week condemning the statements made by the city CFO. As a resident of Norwalk and a taxpayer, I'm not okay with having a city employee that is in charge of managing our city's budget, lack of vision of why investing in our children's education is not only important, but the only way to invest in the future of Norwalk. I do hope that there are consequences to this behavior, as the resident of our city have lost confidence in him as someone that will look after the interests of our children. The city should employ people that are optimistic and find creative ways to fund those things that are important to the resident that pay their salary. I look forward to attending the meeting tomorrow. And once again, please be respectful to each other and remember that your public service is a legacy, not only for yourself, but to your children. Thank you very much. Ilia Valdovinos, 41 Taylor Ave. Good morning. I am a parent of a young child with special education who is a dual language learner. I believe the budget needs to be revised. I would hate for my children to lose this opportunity for better his education. For this, I believe it is unfair that there will be only a 3.7% increase in education funding. This is inadequate and unacceptable for our community. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation. Our priorities need to be the children's education. I am willing to accept slightly higher taxes between $13 and $30 a month for a more robust commitment that directly benefits all of our children. Also, the CFO statement last week were unacceptable, and that the city should appoint more appropriate and thoughtful financial representative to lead the education budget discussion. Dana Moliver, 5 Leslie Lane. To the Norwalk Common Council, Mayor, Board of Ed, my name is Dana Moliver. I live at 5 Leslie Lane, Norwalk, Connecticut, 06850. My husband and I have one graduate from Norwalk Public School who is currently at George Washington University and a sophomore at Brian McMahon High School. I'm writing today because the proposed 3.75% increase in education funding to Norwalk Public School is inadequate and unacceptable. This amount does not even cover current contractual obligation and fails to account for the drop off of federal dollars that Norwalk Public School was forced to spend on operational costs. I'm very disappointed in the town's approach and lack of planning when it comes to looking at the future of Norwalk. Not only the public school, but this every year battle on budget across the board signals a consistent lack of foresight. Not only does the town need to try to get more funding from the state for our school, but I'm also willing to accept slightly higher taxes, as should all business and resident, for more robust commitment that directly benefits all of our children and resets these budgets for subsequent years. Unlike the Norwalk CFO, I do know the value of a Norwalk public education, and I see an excellent return on the investment. Thank you in advance for anything you can do to rectify this situation. Drew Patrick, 8 Cricklewood Lane. Dear Mayor, Council, and Board of Education members, first and foremost, I want to thank you all for your service. As a public school administrator, I understand and value the commitment made by Board of Education members and also value the partnership between the board, our mayor, and our council members. Your work is appreciated. I am writing today as a parent of 2 children in the district, 7th and 9th grade, to express a few key concerns. I will keep my feedback brief. First and foremost, the antagonistic and counterproductive conduct of Mr. Dekowitz towards the public school of the very city he works for is appalling. Really, I can think of no more appropriate word. Anyone who pretends that there is a demonstrably valid return on investment metric in the way he suggested simply has not made the effort to understand how public school or our school works. The rate of return fallacy that he proposed to inform decision-making is absurd and should be debunked publicly and forcefully. I urge you to identify a municipal government that has a valid, reliable, and meaningful rate of return metric for spending on public school that has resulted in some kind of efficiency in spending linked to an improvement in outcomes for kids. His approach is simply shameful and disingenuous. Second, the children in our community, like elsewhere, are struggling. To date, I have not seen or heard our municipal leaders demonstrate a shared, agreed upon working understanding of the impacts the pandemic, poverty, and systemic racism are having on our kids. This comes on the heels of decades of neglect of our schools through inadequate funding. Yes, there are legitimate arguments to be made about where best to spend the financial resources the school district administration has put forward. But to fall so far short of what is needed will only contribute to the unfolding long-term crisis brought on by COVID. The priorities should be clear. 80% of all school budget reflect the cost of the human beings who work with and in support of our children every day. You can't predict which adult is going to make the difference in a child's life and set that child on a new trajectory. The opportunity cost, if return on investment is in play, of eliminating position and foregoing the buttressing of our counseling and mental health support will be immense, and Norwalk will pay for it for years to come. Finally, please do not neglect the physical state of our buildings. Our children need caring adults and safe facility to learn and grow and be healthy. The condition of Rowan Middle School, for example, is embarrassing. Go look at the bathrooms, the condition of the walls, the floor, etc. We haven't been in the buildings 2 years, but without significant investment, and I don't assume Rowan is the top priority, it can only have deteriorated more. Thank you for considering these comments. Anna Tabanek. Hello, I'm really surprised and sad that Norwalk did not use ESSER funds for school-based COVID needs last year and instead used them for the regular budget. I'm shocked this is allowable. If doing this meant that you did not need to increase the school's budget last year, then there is really no reason for not fully funding the budget asked at 9.1% this year. From what I've seen, everything they are planning to do with the money is necessary and reasonable. Please don't shortchange our kids. Jen Jeffries, 165 Winfield Street. Good evening. I am a parent of a 3rd grader at Marvin and 6th grader at Nathan Hale. I would like this comment to go on public record and be read at tomorrow's budget meeting. I am writing to express my support for the Norwalk Public School operating budget and to urge the Common Council to fully fund this budget. It is my understanding that the COVID relief funds will expire, leaving our schools at an even greater deficit, and they will need full funding in order to continue to service the children in our community. In recent years, I have attended several of these meetings and I have read or emailed a similar statement. As you already know, neighboring towns, even urban districts such as Danbury and Stanford, consistently spend more per student than Norwalk. I am disappointed that over these past several years, our city has not been able to raise our per student spending to match similar district, and year after year, we find ourselves having the same debate. I also find it surprising that we are yet again at this impasse, since in many ways, Norwalk seems to be thriving, with development on the rise throughout the city and real estate price skyrocketing. I find it hard to believe that the city is unable to fully fund our schools. It also seems like now is the absolute worst time for the Common Council to deny full funding. After nearly 2 years of a pandemic that has left so many of our children facing academic delays and mental health struggles, schools have never needed full funding more than they need it now. At the very least, our schools must be able to keep class sizes small, keep newly hired intervention teachers on staff and guidance counselor available in order to meet the needs of all our students. Thank you for your time. And that's it.
Thank you, Titsime. According to my count, that was approximately 43 emails that you read. So thank you for a great job in delivering those. Once again, if there's any member of the public that has Zoomed in that wishes to speak, now would be the opportunity to raise your hand. And I see that there is one hand raised.
Okay, Janine, you are allowed to speak.
Hello, this is Janine Randolph, 14 Kingsbury Road. As a Board of Education member and parent, I'm speaking in favor of raising the cap for our proposed budget. I believe 3.75% against the 9.1% request is utterly unacceptable following a flat-funded year. I have 2 children, one who has recently graduated in Norwalk High School and one in middle school here at Nathan Hale. For my eldest, I wish there had been better funding for her education. Funding to help her educators, counselors, and her extracurricular leaders. There were shortcomings, both in education and socially, emotionally. I remember year after year as a parent being involved in conversation as a PTA leader, advocating for the children and the schools as the budget requests were not met, not even knowing now the things that I do know now. For my youngest, I'm hoping we can do better. We need to do better to ensure we bring our children up to the standards that we are striving toward. We should also not forget the achievements of our students as we talk about our return on investment. Our children do get into good schools. They are multilingual by choice. They are on their way to successful first years in college, obtaining college credit here in our schools in Norwalk. Please reconsider the present budget recommendation of 3.75%.
Thank you, Janine. Finally, is there anyone else who has Zoomed in that wishes to speak? Is there anyone else that wishes?
At the moment, it doesn't look like that's the case.
Right,
Looks like that was the last one.
Right, I'll give it 3 announcements before we close. So second announcement, is there anyone else that wishes to speak that is Zoomed in? Finally, is there anyone else that wishes to speak that is Zoomed in? Okay, hearing and seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the public hearing of the operating budget. Thank you, Councilmember Jen McMurray. All those in favor show by the sign of raising your hand. It looks unanimous. Okay, very good. So this closes the public participation, public hearing on the operating budget, and we will now move into the special meeting of the Common Council Finance and Claims Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 9:00 p.m. The roll call for the meeting from the Finance Committee. Councilmember David Hooverman,
Present.
Councilmember Tom Keegan,
Here.
Councilmember John Kites,
Here.
Councilmember Jen McMurray,
Here.
Councilmember Nora Najelski-Eichner,
Present.
Councilmember Diana Revelous,
Here.
and Councilmember Greg Burnett is present, so we have a full quorum. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 2022-2023 recommended operating budget cap and discussion. So I will begin by reading the resolution reflected for the operating budget cap. Whereas Section 1-289 of the Norwalk Charter requires that a majority of the Common Council vote to establish a specific spending limit on locally expenditures during the process of establishing the next fiscal year's operating budget. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Finance and Claims Committee of the Common Council that the maximum limit on the total appropriation for the city of Norwalk for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022 shall be no more than $391,732,046. This appropriation cap represents total expenditures of $414,117,874 less estimated intergovernmental grants of $22,385,828. Be it further resolved that the result of this vote and resolution, together with the attached 2022-2023 budget guide, be forwarded to the Common Council for approval. Do I have a motion to approve this resolution?
Motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Revelous. We will now move into discussion. And let me start before I introduce the mayor, who has some comments, and that will be followed by our Chief Financial Officer, Henry Dakowitz. This budget cap with its suggested budget guide would provide the city with a 3.75% increase of $7,094,039. And it would also provide a guide for the Board of Ed to receive an increase of 4.50% or $9,381,077. So with that, I will turn it over to Mayor Rilling.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. And I want to thank all the council members and the Board of Education members who've worked so diligently to try to put numbers together that would be satisfactory. More importantly, I want to thank all the people that took the time to express their concerns, express their desires. It shows that Norwalk people are engaged. And we appreciate that because that's how we expect things to be. That's how we want things to be. Just within the past couple of days, we've revised some numbers, as you've mentioned, working with our CFO, working with my team, and working with other members of the council. I looked at the numbers again, and my recommended budget, as you suggested, Mr. Burnett, would be a 4.5% increase for the Board of Education, a 3.75% increase on the city side. I met with the superintendent yesterday, discussed this with her, and assured her that we would be meeting, as many people have suggested, a very good suggestion and things that we have done in the past. I would be meeting with her on a regular basis to analyze and evaluate the budget situation at any given time. Obviously, the budget is not something that's static. It's dynamic. It can be adjusted. We can do things during the year as things become necessary and perhaps to avert any crisis that may occur. So we do have that understanding. The the charge that I gave to the city side is that we were going to have no new full-time employees. I made that very clear, and several did ask for new employees, and many of those, if not all of them, got turned down. The 3.75 increase from the 3.69 on the city side, I'm going to use that, and I know a lot of the council people feel very strongly, and I think Tyler Fairburn mentioned it in his comments, that I'm going to be hiring a full-time person for the Parks and Rec staff, and making that person responsible for some of the fields and so forth. We also look at the possibility, there's more than one way to accomplish a goal. So we know that the fields need attention. So do we hire one full-time person and give them extra money for overtime, which would be built into this so that they can hire overtime on the days that it's needed, a Friday afternoon, a Saturday morning, to prepare the fields so that the teams that are playing can have a decent field to play on. So that is really what I have. As I said, the 4.5 for the Board of Ed side, 3.75 for the city side, and meeting with the superintendent on a regular basis. And I know the council people will be participating in some of those meetings. The Board of Ed people will be participating in some of those meetings. So we can continue the discussion. And as I said, make adjustments as we feel would be necessary. So thank you for the opportunity to address everybody. Thank you again to all the people who took the time and stayed with us and made their comments known to us so that we can take those into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Rilling. Before I hand it over to our CFO, Henry Dakowitz, to go into a little more detail with the numbers, I just wanted to acknowledge that we do have council members who are attending this special meeting. And going across my screen, I see Heidi Altman, Dominique Johnson, Barbara Smith, Nicole Ayers, and Darlene Young. Thank you. Henry, over to you.
Thank you. If you can all see the spreadsheet I'm putting up here. We have the 21 actual numbers, the 22 budget, 23 requested, and now recommended. So we have the details by line item. When you get to the totals, we're looking at, let me just make sure the headings can be seen by everyone if I could.
I'm sorry, Henry, you're sounding a little muffled.
All right, let me just work on something first. I want to make sure everyone can see the screen in a way that is beneficial and they can get the gist of what's going on. So bear with me for 1 second. Okay. So here's that spreadsheet again. Now when I scroll down, you can see the recommendation for the city is 196.3 million, an increase from last year's budget of 7,094, 3.75%. And the recommendation for the Board of Education is now 217.8 million, an increase of 9.4 million or 4.5%. Blended for the total outlay for the city, it's 414.1 million, an increase of 16.5 million, increase of 4.14%. Let me now share a different spreadsheet. So here we have the spreadsheet that shows how we go from those numbers and get down to mill rates and average tax bills. So we start as we did before. This was the revised budget. This is what was requested. The budget last year was 397.6. That was the approved budget. What was requested was 424.1 million. The recommendation, 412.4. And now we're looking at, instead of 216.3 for the Board of Ed, it's 217.8, an increase of 1.6 million. That took us from 3.75% to 4.5%. On the city side, the requested was 196.6 million. The recommendation was 196.2 million. We're now at 196.3 million, an increase of $118,000. In total, the 22 budget was 397.6 million. Requested was 424 million. Original recommendation was 412.4. We're now at 414.1, an increase of 1.7 million. What happens is when we look at these expenditures, and we're now focusing on column J, those are the revised numbers. So we have to try to raise $414 million to have a flat budget. Well, we have tax adjustments, which are for things like the elderly credit. So we're not going to be collecting taxes on these tax adjustments. That's 3.6 million. We also have to make a projection. Not everyone pays their taxes. So we project, as we have for many years, that we will collect 98.6% of our taxes, but that means 5.1 million would not be collected. So these are additions to the budgets that we have to collect taxes. So we take the 3.6 and the 5.1, 8.7 million, add it to the 414.1, and that's how we get 422.8 million. That's what we call the gross tax levy. But then we have items that reduce the amount of taxes that we have to charge. Get back up a little bit. So we have other tax revenue. That includes back taxes and supplemental auto. So that amount is 5.6 million. Non-tax revenue is predominantly intergovernmental state grants, but it also includes departmental receipts of 10.3 million, interest and penalties, investment income, and other items. So it adds up to 45.8 million. So and also we are drawing down the rainy day fund by 4 million. So when we add up these numbers, 5.6 million, 45.8 million, and 4 million, this is a total of approximately $55.5 million we will not need to raise in taxes. We take 422.8 minus these reductions, and we get what's called our net tax levy. That's the amount our taxes must raise in order to finance the budgets on a balanced basis. We take the net grand list of $14.9 billion. we simply divide the 367.4 million divided by the 14.886 billion, and we get an average mill rate for the whole city of 24.683 mills. Last year, the number was 23.972. This is an increase of 0.71 mills or 2.96%. We then take the median home value using the fourth taxing district as symbolic or representative of the whole city. Median means half the values are above that number and half the values are below that number. And that number in the fourth district is $275,550. If you then take that average mill rate, 24.683, and multiply it by that average home value, 275,550, we get an average tax bill of $6,801. Last year, it was $6,606. That's an increase of $196 or 2.96%. I'm going to jump out for a second so that I can work with that spreadsheet and put the titles in the right place so that everyone can see that. If you just bear with me for a second. Okay. Now let's look at how we calculate, going from the average for the whole city, how we get the district mill rate calculations. Okay, the grand list by district is listed on line 63. So 2.6 billion first district, going across to 6.6 billion in the fourth, and the total is what we showed before for the whole city, $14.9 billion. However, included in those totals are the grand list for vehicles, where we have a separate tax, not on homeowners. So we take out the $909.8 million from the grand list representing the vehicles. And we're going to set that up separately in the 10th district. So in essence, what we're saying is that $909.8 million will be raised by the taxes on motor vehicles. The rest of the money will be coming in real estate taxes. So if you recall, the net tax levy, what we had to raise in taxes was $367.4 million. You'll see down here, we took out we take out fire, garbage, and lighting because those services are not provided to all districts. So what we do, for example, with the fire, $34.3 million. Well, those are only provided to districts 1 through 5. So we take that cost and we allocate it to those 5 districts based on that grand list value, but only for the 5 districts. Similarly, for garbage, $1.3 million of cost, and we spread it over 4 districts, okay, from the 1st through the 4th. Lighting is the 4th and the 5th. And then we take out the 27.7 million for the vehicles. If you take off all those numbers, the 367 becomes $302.9 million. Okay, so we have the fire, the garbage, and the lighting, and here are the numbers as they get allocated. Okay, the fire is allocated over districts 1 through 5. The garbage is allocated over districts 1 through 4, and the lighting is allocated over the 4th and 5th districts alone. Now we do the core allocation. So when we took off those deductions or offsets from the 367 million we have to raise, it gets us to $302.9 million. We take that $302.9 million, and that's a core allocation for all districts. So in this case, we take that number and divide by the grand list for all the districts, and we get a mill rate, the core mill rate, the services we're offering through to all districts of 21.6749 mills. We then look at the fire and we say that $34.3 million is allocated to those 5 districts. The amount of that mill rate is 2.7447, but we only charge those districts who are getting fire service. Similarly for garbage, the 1.3 million is allocated to districts 1 through 4. That mill rate is 0.1189. The lighting is 0.1479 only for the 4th and 5th district. Now, the 6th district charges their residents for the services that they provide. And the number I was given, we bill and collect the monies, but it goes directly to the 6th taxing district. And that number is 1.254 mills. And the way we get the mill rate by district is to add up the items that they're being charged. First district adds up to 24.5385, those 3 items. And it's the same for the first 3 districts. They're all getting core, fire, and garbage. In the 4th district, they also get lighting. So that's a bit higher, 24.6864. 5th district gets lighting, but not garbage, 24.5675. 6th district gets the core plus the 6th taxing district charge of 1.254. Their mill rate is 22.9289. And you'll also see the 10th district, which is just motor vehicles, is 30.4670. Now on this chart, you can also see that's the recommended mill rate. The line in white is what was approved last year. And then we calculated the change in mills and the percentage change from last year's budget. So first district went up by 0.5, first, second, and third districts went up by 0.5705 mills, 2.38%. The 4th district went up by 0.6324 mills, or 2.63%. 5th district went up by 0.9465, 4.01%. 6th district went up by 0.7629, 3.44%. And the mill rate for vehicles remained the same, no increase. We then want to use those mill rates and calculate average tax bill. So we take the median home value in each district. 241.70 in the first, 227,420 in the second, 304,840 in the third, 275,550 in the fourth, 375,840 in the fifth, 764,730 in the 6th taxing district. So all we do here is what we did up above when we did the city averages. We take the 24.5385 mill rate times the average home value. Now here, the first 3 districts had the same mill rate, but they have different median home values. So the average tax bill is different. In the first district, $5,893, an increase of $137 from last year, 2.38%. Second district, $5,581, increase of $130, 2.38%. Third, average tax bill $7,480, an increase of $174, the same 2.38% increase. The fourth district, $6,802, increase of $174, 2.63%. The fifth district, average tax bill $9,233, increase of $356 from last year, or 4.01%. Sixth tax district, $17,534, an increase of $583, or 3.44%. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Henry, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Yes.
Thank you. I can see now. Yeah, Councilmember Nora Najelski-Eichner.
Good evening, Mr. Dakowitz. Thank you very much for the updated information. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm thrilled to hear that we have moved to 4.5% for the schools and 3.75% for the city. And I'm particularly thrilled about the Parks and Rec decision. I know that that's something that has tremendous value to families in the city, to everyone in the city. And like I said, I'm thrilled to hear that we've moved to 4.5. I have lots of thoughts about that and why I still think that number is too low. But before we move on to that, I want to better understand the changes in the numbers that were just presented to us now in terms of the rate per taxing district. Am I correct? Well, let me just, rather than me guessing, let me ask you, why did the rates go down for the sixth taxing district, among others?
I'm sorry, I don't recall that the rates went down. Let me share my screen again. The sixth taxing district, the mill rate went up by 0.7629 or 3.44%. The average tax bill went up by $583 or 3.44%.
So I'm looking at, and I apologize, I did not get today's in a hard copy. So I was referring back to my recommended operating budget book from February 7th. And at that point, with a 3.69 or 3.75% increase, the sixth taxing district's rate was a 6.8%. So does this have to do, I just want to make sure I understood. Does this represent a substantive change, or is this just a change in how the calculations were run and it doesn't make a difference to the ultimate outcome?
I want to make sure I understand the question. I think these are the revised numbers and we ran them through the model. We corrected items that might have been inaccurate. And when we put it all together, here is what the mill rates and the average tax bills will be based on giving the city 3.75% and giving the Board of Ed 4.5%.
Okay, terrific. Well, I really appreciate that. That certainly is a reasonable looking number, and I really appreciate that. Can you, since again, I don't have access to this spreadsheet myself, nor did I have time to do calculations beforehand. As we discussed the last time you and I spoke about these numbers, the majority of taxpayers do pay their taxes through their mortgage escrow, and so they really pay them monthly rather than yearly. So could you provide us, and again, I can do the math in terms of what the yearly breakdown is, but my question is, if we wanted to consider an increase, for instance, if we wanted to consider an increase to the 5.4% that the board has requested to include the Sono Incubator program, Is there some way that we, either that you could do the calculation for us right now, or that we as council members could use a spreadsheet like this to figure out what the increase would be if we move to a 5.4% instead of a 4.5%, again, broken down for the districts?
Sure. I've spent a lot of time on the model, and I've spent a lot of time running many different variations to determine what the results and impact would be. So if you tell me what you'd like to do with the inputs, which are up on top, which are how much the city and the Board of Ed get, and you could do it on a percentage basis, I could then run it through this model and provide those numbers for you.
That would be super helpful. I would really appreciate that. I think at the moment, 5.4% is the number that I would like to see run. There may be other numbers, going forward, but that's one that the Board of Ed has put forward already as a number that has particular value to them, and that is backup to support the justification for that request.
Okay.
Are there any additional questions? Yes, Councilmember Jen McMurray.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of the information you put together tonight, Mayor and Mr. Dakowitz. I wanted to ask something that came up time and time again, and I'm hoping you can shed some light on this in many of the emails we received. It was a question about the mall and the tax relief we received from that the year it opened, and any other commercial developments that have happened. How has that helped, or how does that continue to help our finances in the city and offset any tax increases potentially that we might have to make?
Well, the mall is a new structure, and it's worth, I believe it's been assessed at $500 million in value. So by definition, it increases the entire grand list, but they will have to pay taxes based on that assessment. So assuming everything else is constant, that the home values don't change, you now have, in essence, a structure worth $500 million absorbing some of the increases in the expenses that we're trying to pay for. I will note that the mall was given a 7-year abatement. And normally what's done is it starts off small, goes up a little bit each year till the end of the 7th year where they're paying full rates. The agreement that was made with the mall is that for 7 years, they will pay 50% of the tax that they would normally do on the $500 million value. And then at the end of those 7 years, they would pay 100% of the total value. So obviously, getting a large new structure, which increases our grand list by $500 million, is very valuable. But it's abated a bit during the 7 years to give them an opportunity as their business grows.
If I could just add something to that. The abatement was due to the fact that they are in the enterprise zone. And certain structures in the enterprise zone are entitled to that abatement. As Mr. Dakowitz mentioned, I think the first 2 years, under normal circumstances, they don't pay any taxes whatsoever. And then it gradually goes up during the next 5 years. So in order to have a win-win, a good thing for the city and a good thing for the mall or the Brookfield, is they're paying 50% all the way across. The other thing is, I believe, and Mr. Dakowitz, you can correct me, last budget season, they didn't get any, before they got their CO and before they opened, they did not get any tax abatement whatsoever. And they actually paid more than they would have paid under the enterprise zone.
Yes, what happened there was that there was a deadline to get the certificate of occupancy by October 1st, which is the date when we assess all the structures in the city. And they did not get that certificate of occupancy at that time. Consequently, the value that was assessed at that time did not fall under the abatement. It wasn't 100% assessed. It was less than the 500 million, but they got no break. So we had a little bit of an unexpected windfall that first year when we anticipated only getting 50%.
Thank you very much for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Okay, I see hands raised. Councilmember Heidi Altman.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Burnett. Sorry, let me lower my hand. Okay, I have several questions, and I'm going to just preface any statements or questions that I'm going to ask with, it's not in my nature to be openly rude to someone. I am still feeling very offended from the unfortunate comment that was made. So to Mr. Dakowitz, in the calmest way I can say it, have you put into practice any changes since that statement was made? Meaning, like, do you fundamentally do anything different to come up with numbers to think about what is a proper investment? Or did you feel bad you said it, but like everything else is the same?
If I could just say, Heidi,
that recommended budget was from me.
Yeah, can we, the questions that we're trying to address now,
That's fine.
hold on, Heidi, can I just say, can we keep the questions that we are raising now related to the motion that's on the floor, related to the operating budget cap that we're trying to move forward to? I would appreciate that.
Sure.
So do you have any questions related to the cap?
Yeah. So
Great.
there were two questions. The one, and I haven't been able to get like I think a solid answer about the last time a rainy day fund was used. So there's two questions around that. Has there ever been a time when the city utilized the rainy day fund and was penalized for it? Or does anybody know of any surrounding city in which that happened? I do feel like it's worth mentioning during a pandemic. This seems like maybe an appropriate time. And I know you guys are planning to use a little bit, I believe. I'm so sorry, I've forgotten the actual number, but you are planning to use a little bit of the rainy day fund to cover even at the 3.7%. I'm just wondering how much thought has been put into tapping into it a little bit more for a one time. And actually, as you just heard about the mall. So there's a few years where like there's tax abatement, but then we will get revenue. Is it worth considering tapping into that temporarily while we wait for things like that to come back into place?
These are complex questions, okay? Having a healthy rainy day fund is viewed very favorably by the rating agencies. That's the appearance. And then substantively, having a rainy day fund for unexpected eventualities is really meaningful to the city. It allowed us during COVID to manage much better knowing we have a cushion. Just think about a household budget. If you spend everything that you make and you have no cushion, when something unexpected occurs, you're scrambling because you don't have options and choices. So the rainy day fund is perceived very valuably by people who lend us money by buying our bonds, by saying, sure, it looks good, but what if their finances turn negative? Well, by knowing we have a healthy rainy day fund, they know we will make the principal and interest payments on those bonds in a timely manner, and we'll ride out the storm. How we use them, I would say that the rating agencies generally do not look favorably when rainy day funds are used just to fill a gap in an annual budget. That's not really what they're designed to do. I understand that people view that rainy day fund, and there are constraints or guidelines that have been issued by the city. So when we get to a certain point where the rainy day fund is of a size that people feel we have some extra room, that's when we pulled it down to use for this coming year's budget, where we said, if we take $4 million out and we use it toward this year's budget, we would still have sufficient rainy day fund for the expected eventualities of the next 12 months in the next year's budget. Having said that, it's like having said that, it's like anything else. You can spend it all today, and it would be beneficial by spending the money and getting benefits from it and depleting it, but then you don't have it tomorrow. It's pay me now or pay me later. I think the city was wise over the last 6-7 years in building up a rainy day fund to protect the city's finances. However, I understand the argument on the other side, and it's a balancing act, and that's what the elected officials, the mayor and the council people, have to decide.
No, and I understand that. I do respect the theory behind that. I think my only response is it is a pandemic, so it is a rainy day, like just by definition. It's why I was asking the questions about Hurricane Sandy, because from what I understand, in a terrible moment, we were still okay, right? Like during terrible times, there are federal funds that come in, which is what happened to cover some of the school's budget. It's all, and I don't even pretend to understand most of the budgetary questions that are happening. I just want to know, is this something that is actually being looked at as a temporary, not as a, well, we're just going to do this every year? Because mostly the argument against some of the funding, and I want to be clear, I advocate not just for the Board of Ed, I advocate strongly, as many people do, for the Parks and Rec, but also for like emergency services, for summer youth programs. I have been trying to find out information about that from the city. It is like, I mean, to your point about investing, like I do think it makes sense when we are in a place where the only argument I hear is we don't want to raise taxes. And that is a strong reason for anything. And we do not want to relocate people that can no longer afford to live here if we keep raising taxes. So I just want to know in totality, is that even an option in a temporary way? I mean, it sounds like the answer is just consistently no, but my only reference is in a time when the city did need to tap into the rainy day fund. Basically, I think I was told that probably almost all of it was reimbursed by FEMA. So I'm just thinking if there's other ways to look at this. That's all. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that comment. I think a different way of looking at it was we were fortunate that FEMA and the COVID relief funds came in. What if the federal government didn't do that? Where would we be? There are cities and counties across the country that suffered much worse than we did. Okay, there are cities like Las Vegas that rely on tourism taxes, and tourism dried up. Okay, there are places that relied on sales tax, and when people lose their jobs and businesses go out of business, there's much less sales tax revenue. We were fortunate. We're based on real estate taxes in an area where the value of the homes is solid, and the way we budget, the homes would have to go down by 98% in value for us not to get the value in a tax sale. It's not like in 2008 when the banks lent 95% of the value of a home, and when the homes dropped 20%, they're suffering severe losses. So part of it is how we managed. The fact that we didn't have to use it significantly because the federal government bailed everyone out doesn't mean that we weren't wise to have a rainy day fund. So I would just finish by saying, I don't look at drawing down rainy day funds to fill the budget as a natural event that we should be looking at every year. The dollar amount of our budgets and the costs go up every year, 3, 4, 5, 6%. So the rainy day fund has to go up as well in order to cushion us. And the reason we got the rainy day fund is because the managers managed well. They brought in more revenue than was projected. and they spent less than we projected. You don't get a rainy day fund when you manage a budget flat or people are over budget. So this is a testimony to the good managerial actions that have been taken. As a finance professional, I would say it's a buffer that's very valuable to the city. But I would agree with you that every year we could examine the numbers and see whether the rainy day fund has sufficient amounts such that we might be able to use some of them to bridge a gap in the budget.
Well, right. So my final comment on that topic is, it is why I wonder, I hear a lot about taxation. I am wondering if having such a hefty rainy day fund is an inappropriate use of taxes that have already been paid. But I know little on the subject, so I'll leave it at that. I had one last question. I do not know if you were around in 2016. There was some questions that I had been, brought to my attention about how the Board of Ed had to tap into their insurance fund to cover contractual obligations. And that was directed by, I believe, the council, but maybe by the city. Could anybody elaborate on that? And why do things like this keep happening?
Sure, I'll elaborate. Both the city and the Board of Ed maintain insurance funds. They're in 3 categories. One is for health insurance. The second is for liability, auto, and property insurance. And the third is for workman's compensation. The reason they were set up primarily is when we self-insured for health insurance. So when you have a traditional indemnity policy, when an insurance underwriter says, you pay me a premium and I'll cover the expenses, you have a much better confidence level of how much that's going to cost you because you know the premiums. There are many large organizations that self-insure different parts of their insurance program. We may hire someone, often known as a third-party administrator, to do the administrative paperwork, but we pay the claims. So consequently, you now have variability. We might have a bad year with a couple of very significant claims, and it might be more than what we budget. And we might have a good year when the claims are less than we budget. So amounts were set up in the insurance fund, as I said, 3 for the city and 3 for the Board of Ed. And when we establish how much we have to pay in insurance out of our annual budget, we take the balances in those funds into account. If the balance is healthy based on the recent amount of claims, we will ask for less insurance as we take that balance and draw it down. When the balance goes down because of excessive claims, we may ask for more insurance in the budget to beef up the reserve. So what might have happened years ago, I don't know the specifics, might have been the Board of Ed had significant claims which depleted their fund balance or lessened it to a certain point where they felt that they needed to beef it up in the next budget cycle. Does that answer your question?
I think sort of. I am wondering what happened that, with their budget that year that they needed to do that, but that's okay for now. That was enough.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. I see hands raised with Council Member Nora Najelski-Eitner, followed by Dominique Johnson and Nicole Ayers. Nora?
I'll be very quick. I just wanted to follow up on a question that Councilmember McMurray raised, which I think also relates a little bit to a point that Councilmember Alterman was making. Am I correct that we are going to be doing a grand list update next year? And if so, can you just explain briefly to the public what that might entail and provide any information you have so far about projections we've made, about the likely impact of that? Because I think, again, that relates to questions we've been hearing from the public about the impact of development, and it would help them understand some of that context. And again, it's late, so a brief answer would just be appreciated at this point.
Sure. The assessor, Bill Ford, is the expert. What he has explained to me is we have a cycle every 5 years where we revalue every property in the city. That will be done in October of 2023. So we're talking about 18 months from now, 20 months from now, but we will have and incur expenses in this coming year's budget to get that done. Think of the concept as follows. You saw my calculations to get a mill rate. There are differences in the grand list value by district. So when the mall came on board, $500 million property, but it's only in one district. So now for that district, for the same amount of money we needed to raise, it's divided by that grand list amount. And that grand list amount just got increased. The larger the denominator, the smaller the value of the fraction. So by having the mall as a new property in that district, everyone in that district paid less because they absorbed some of the costs. It may not be obvious, but if all the homes went up by the same amount, 5% throughout the city, it wouldn't affect the relative value of the mill rates. If the cost of running the city goes up by 4 or 5%, and the value of the homes are all the same relative to one another now, then everyone will go up by 4 or 5%, depending upon, as you saw, where we drew down the fund balance or if we have other sources of revenue. So if the expenses go up by 5%, if we don't have new sources of revenue or increased sources, then that's how much the property taxes have to go up. The one point I would make that Mr. Ford explained to me is that during COVID, there were two phenomena that affected real estate values in the city. One is commercial real estate has gone down in value. We have work at home. Companies are leasing less space commercially. The second phenomenon is the migration primarily from New York, but also, I guess, from Boston or other cities, where individual families are coming into the city and they bid up the price of homes. Generally a good deal. However, if you look at the grand list from a big picture, the value of residential properties has gone up and the value of commercial properties have gone down because of the big trends. So what should happen, unless something changes, is when we do the 2023 revaluation, there will be a shift. So the residential homeowners will have to pick up a bigger share of whatever those costs are, and the commercial properties will take a lesser share. It's 20 months away. We don't know what will happen at that point in time, but based on the trends over the last 2 years, that's a phenomenon that might occur.
Council Member Dominique Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Burnett. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this committee, though not a member. Like my colleagues, I'm really happy to see that we have a different number this evening. Personally, I've been trying to do back of the envelope math about what we can do to raise the per pupil expenditure as close to 19,000 as possible, and I feel like this gets very close. So that's good. I also am grateful. I had the chance to talk with the head of the pension board recently about some other issue, but I just, I'm so grateful they gave us better footing to start this whole conversation on too. I'm gonna kind of pull on a couple of threads, and I'll try to be brief because I know it's late. And Mr. Dakowitz, I want to pick up a thread about the rainy day fund. Let's just say, with the impending reval and with an efficiency study that we don't yet know the outcomes on and what that means for us and how we can plan, what about drawing down an additional $500,000 to pay for a truly one-time expenditure to address some of the issues our young people have faced because of COVID that I just hope with all my heart is truly a one-time issue?
Well, I would say, again, I'm the finance expert who gives you information and numbers for you to make the decisions. The decisions are made by the elected officials, the mayor and the common council. If you decide to draw down more on the rainy day fund to use for operating expenditures in the fiscal 2023 year, then that's what we'll do. I've laid out the risks, the benefits, and if you determine that that's what you want to do, then that's what will get done. The power is all yours.
Right, I appreciate that. I think what I'm getting at is it possible for you to potentially run a scenario in addition to Councilmember Najelski-Eichner's scenario where we draw down 500,000 from the rainy day fund in addition to the 4 million?
I hope by now the model works. So if you want to increase expenditures or increase the amount we draw down from the rainy day fund, if you looked at the model, it has $4 million as a drawdown. And that affects all the numbers to the mill rates and the average tax bill. If you want to increase that to 4.5 million, I can put it into the model and show you what the results would be.
That would be great. I really appreciate this because hearing folks tonight talk about how they would be able to stomach a slight increase in taxes, but really generally no more than $20 a month. I'm just wondering if this is an option. I'm just looking, for information. So I appreciate that. And alternately, I'm really happy that we're also seeing a potential to have Parks and Rec be supported. A diversity, equity, inclusion officer has become something that we have thought about now having in our city this year. So if the overall rate was upped from 4.14 to 4.25, that's also a scenario I'd be interested in seeing how the taxing districts would be breaking down according to that. And I appreciate that. And lastly, I'll just say, this is so funding education with unfunded mandates, and so much is locked into pay for salaries, pension, and related expenses to that. This is just such, it's clearly not easy, and you can probably see on many of our faces how much we're deliberating. And I don't want to say, I'll just say this, that this really does weigh heavy on the heart to make sure we're doing right by everybody in the city and making sure we don't lose working families in the city while balancing what we need so that we can meet contractual obligations in the Board of Education budget. So I'm happy that that's something that we're talking about tonight. Although I do see there's like a broad definition in the budget they gave us that this 4.5 is good faith, at least for that start. So thank you. And thanks for giving us that information.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Nicole Ayers.
Thank you, Chair Burnett. I would like to stand and support several of my colleagues who have eloquently said that we need to look at these numbers, but they are happy that the numbers are moving. In saying that about taking the look, I was wondering if you could give any clarity about the increase that the city is receiving. I know our procedure is that our departments submit their request, and then the finance department analyzes those requests in order to put together a recommended budget. With the increase that you have stated, Mr. Dakiewicz, can you articulate in any fashion what, how that would help? I know the mayor spoke about hiring one person, even though I'm grateful for the one, but we really need more than one. I'm gonna be that person. I'm grateful for the one, but we really do need more than one person in recreation and parks. Could you articulate at any cost what other departments receive any other type of increase under the increase of the city?
Well, I start by looking at the overall numbers. 96% of our employees are in a union, and the unions get 2.35% increase per year. In addition, we have step raises based on people's tenure with the city. Sometimes it's over a 10-year period, sometimes shorter. So when I look at the operating budget, I assume there's about 2.5% increase. And again, the personnel cost is usually 75% of our total costs. We're people. So when I look at a budget, I expect it to go up by 2.5% just based on the contractual obligations to our employees. Then you have contracts that we have with services with outside vendors, and there are contractual increases there. So I view 2.5 to 2.75 and 3% as almost like a flat budget, because that's what we need in order to just keep going and keep operations going. So after the departments made their requests, I cut a small amount from what was requested, but it ended up as 3.69%. And overall for the city, I thought that was reasonable and not bad. Obviously, we go into every department, every line item, when people want to increase part-time or overtime or contracted services, we look at that. We look at the proposals for new hires. The mayor always reminds me, often when we hire someone and it's a new position, not filling a vacancy, that might be a burden and an expense for 30 years. And we have to be very careful about what we're doing when we make those long-term commitments. Obviously, when the argument is made and we feel it's justified because we need the services, then that's when we make that decision. So I do the first go round with the departments, then I sit down with the mayor, we talk about it, we might call in certain department heads and ask more questions about what they're looking for. He may reverse something that I've cut. He may cut something I've allowed. And that's how we come out with the CFO and mayor recommended budget.
Thank you, Mr. Dakowicz. I would ask my colleagues, I am not a member but of this particular committee, but I would ask my colleagues as we continue to deliberate over the entire city budget for us to really take in perspective the quality of life for all citizens, and really dumb down on this budget and see where we can help improve quality of life for all of our residents. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time to speak.
Thank you, Councilperson Ayers. Next question from Council Member Diana Revelous.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Sorry for the echoing. But my biggest question, first of all, Dakowicz, I just wanted to say, a lot of your words, I understood what you were saying. I just want to say that. Secondly, I kind of want to know, because of the way we're conversing, and especially with residents who may not truly understand what they say when they're saying we'll take on an additional expense. How would this affect our lowest hanging fruits, our residents who are not homeowners, the ones who do need these resources but can get strangled by these same percentages? I think we talk about employers, I think we talk about homeowners, but how does this look like truly on a financial situation where even like my colleague said about even quality of life, how does this look for the non-homeowner that has to facilitate in these additional expenses, and what are their numbers? What is their data points?
I'm not sure I understand exactly, but let me try to respond and tell me.
And I could clarify even more if need be, but let me know if I have to clarify more,
Let me try to address the question, and then if I don't, you can clarify.
Okay, most definitely.
So our taxes are based on real property and taxes upon them. So if people are not homeowners and they are renters, then we are taxing the owner of that apartment building. And generally, if the taxes go up on the owner of an apartment building, they expect to recoup that maybe by increasing rents. So that's how they end up paying for a portion of the increased expenses. So it's a little hidden and indirect. They're not paying it directly to the city as most homeowners who get tax bills. Having said that, if they have vehicles, then they're taxed on the vehicles as well. So they may be apartment dwellers, but if they have vehicles, they're taxed directly, and those taxes come directly to the city. The third component of taxes, just to be complete, is the tax on personal property owned by businesses. So if we have a company with high tech and they have computer servers and lots of expensive equipment, they are supposed to inventory them and we tax them on the value of that personal property. So again, we're trying to spread it out to all portions of the city so that everyone contributes to help pay for the services that we provide on a citywide basis.
So
Does that
you
answer your question?
you did answer it quite well, and I wanted people to hear that because I also want others to remember our rents are not low, right? And we've also been talking for well before, during and well before this pandemic about how equal is not equitable, right? So those increases that we're looking for everyone to do, again, doesn't seem to be in a space and place that it's truly equitable for our community, right? And I just, although we understand that our children are important, the families and the communities that base and hold those children to support them to go to school is actually like what we should be paying attention to and looking at. And I think, and I understood exactly what you were saying before at the last meeting. And I think people just have to put that into equation about how equitably that might not be okay, especially for, you know, families that statistically, for every $5 I have, you have 12, it won't make sense to add some of these things. So again, I am glad with the numbers. I am a parent in NPS. I'm involved. I'm actually one of the council members that are always in our schools. I've actually can see directly the goods and bads that are happening within our school. I also know that there's a lot that our schools need already that haven't been addressed or already promised to that we have to take care of. So in speaking that, I just wanted to speak not only to our chair, our council, our BOE and our residents who spoke so eloquently, that again, we have to think about what's equitable for our community. Everyone equally taking on a slice of the pie in a sense doesn't necessarily mean that would be sustainable. That's all. And thank you for your work, Henry.
Thank you, Diana.
Okay, moving on, Council Member David Hooverman.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. I'll try and move this along pretty quick because I know it's late and we've all been here a while. First, I'd like to say thank you to the parents who spoke tonight and who sent the letters and the emails in. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for being concerned and for raising your voices. I would like to ask you to all hang on to that energy and go to Hartford and talk about ECS funding with the same passion, because we do need more funding coming to Norwalk, and that is an issue on the state level. When I look back, and Henry, I have to say thank you for the documents that you put together with the information that you have in them are invaluable to me. And I'm really happy that the mayor and the city team and yourself were able to move the needle a little bit and do what you did to be able to get to this 4.5 number in this recommendation. I want to say thank you to that. One of the things that I find fascinating in the documents that you prepare is your historical allocation of local tax dollars page. And it's impressive when you look at it, when you go back to, fiscal year 2014, 2015, or I guess fiscal year 2015, which would be 2014-15 year. And you look at the numbers moving forward, and you look at the amount of money that wasn't being put forth to the schools, and especially wasn't being put forth to the city. There are some years that the city side is a negative number, a negative increase when you look at that going across. And when you come up into our more modern history, the fiscal year 20 was an $8 million to the Board of Ed. In fiscal year 21, it was a $9.9 million rise to the Board of Ed. We're talking about a $9.3 million this year, which I think is a substantial sum of money. And I think that the fact that we've gotten to that place is good. It's a lot of money. The conversations about the rainy day fund to try to make that more. I was one of the parents years ago who would stand and talk to this body and say, you know, we need to spend this money. And I still believe that we do need to spend this money, but I'm concerned about spending the money right now, here and now. We are living on some found money in federal grants because of the pandemic. You yourself just said, Henry, when you were explaining about the mall and how the taxes get assessed and how this moves forward, that, you know, we're going into a reval in 23. We're seeing changes. We're seeing changes in commercial property. We're seeing changes in home ownership property. We don't know. We're in a great deal of unknowns here, and you know, and my concern right now is that we put ourselves out on the cliff that we've all talked about. And I'd like to hold us back from the cliff. And I think that this budget right now reflects a spot to sort of be cautious in this moment, because I think over the course of the next couple of years, a lot of things are going to play out. We're looking at potentials of, you know, inflation that we're not 100% certain how it's going to affect all of us. And this is something that Councilperson Revolus was just speaking about. You know, that $5 increment can be a real budget killer for some families, and we have to be very careful of that right now, especially going into a time where we're uncertain. And I think that there's a lot of uncertainty. Our economy is rebounding. I think things are looking very positive, but my feeling is a feeling of caution. I'm glad that we got to the 4.5 because I think that was indicated by the Board of Ed in their budget documents as a kind of marker number. And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to you know, get more there down the road. But for 23, my feeling is the 4.5% and the which is the 9.3, and what we're doing for the city side is where we need to be. And I support this this resolution as stands.
Council Member Tom Keegan.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. I'd like to echo what our colleague, Councilwoman Revolus said, is that we can't look at things through only our own lens. We have to look at things through other people's eyes, and including those people who may not be able to afford tax increases regardless of the amount. David Yulverman, our colleague, alluded to it as well. The question I do have, though, is we heard many, many times during the public comments that the original 3.75% increase doesn't even cover current contractual obligations. Now, I was doing some arithmetic, and albeit I learned to do arithmetic many, many years ago, before math was invented, by the way. So I'm wondering if Henry might be able to answer that question. Was that 3.75% increase going to cover the contractual obligations of the unions?
I can't, I find it hard to answer on behalf of the school Board of Ed.
Okay.
I think their CFO is much closer to the numbers, and he could explain that. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. I did do the arithmetic, Henry, thank you. And I found that the that 3.75% increase was going to cover those contractual obligations, even with kind of a bloated increase in healthcare benefits of 6%, that'll probably be more or closer to 4%. But in any event, thank you, Henry, for your explanations tonight. I sincerely appreciate them.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, there being no more questions, let us move to, oh, okay.
I promise I will be brief. To everyone's point about how taxing, if you're not a property owner and it does funnel down, it absolutely does, which is one of the reasons why I would like to seriously look at the rainy day fund, especially for those people. They don't see the benefit of the taxation that they get. Their rent does go up year after year. We have a serious problem in this city with under-taxed dwellings, right? Dwellings that are supposed to be a single family home that have more than one person. It's those people that I would like to advocate for. I think that is something the city probably needs to look at and has nothing to do directly with this conversation, but there are many ways to look at a problem, and I feel like we get the exact same rhetoric over and over. So that's all I had to say.
Okay, are there any additional questions before we call for the vote on the motion that is on the floor related to the operating budget cap? Council member Darlene Young. Councilmember Darlene Young, you have your hand raised?
I do, but I don't have my mic on, so I have it on now. It's late. I just have a quick comment, and I just want to say, while I'm not a member of this committee, I'm glad that I did jump on this call and to listen to everyone's very pertinent and comments and questions. But I do really fall on the side of Diane Revelous and David Hevelman. I think David said it perfectly. We don't know where we're headed. We kind of have an idea, and we really need to be mindful of that. And this is not an easy process for any of us. We go through this every year, and while some might think that we are very cavalier about this, we are not. But I do appreciate the opportunities that we've had to talk about this a little bit more. And I think I've heard in the comments from those read and from other council members, we need to change this process a little bit so it doesn't seem so contentious among ourselves and the way it appears in the public's eye. We are all here trying to make the best decision with what we have, with the information that we do have. And it is not an easy decision, but I hope, I'm glad to see that the mayor has raised the cap on this to this 4.7525 from where we started. I think that's a good point, and that I agree with that. And I don't think that we really need to go much higher than that. So I'm hopeful that this resolution passes and that we can move forward. We don't all get what we want all the time, but we have to come to some compromise. And I think this is a good compromise. And I thank you, Henry, for all the work that you do. This is not an easy position for you to be in as well. And so I appreciate all the effort you put into all of this. So I just wanted to say that, and to the whole staff. You know, the city goes through it. There's a lot of departments that are not getting what they feel they need on the city side. I am thankful to the mayor that we are getting someone with for recreation and parks. You've been asking for that well before my time, so I'm very appreciative of that. But the goal is moving forward that we hope to make improvements and enhancements on both the city side and the Board of Education side. But we got to do it all together, and we've got to really be able to be okay with not getting everything that we all want, so that we move forward to do this all again next year. So I have nothing more to say. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Young. So with that, we have a motion on the floor. The resolution has been read and it's related to the operating budget cap. So at this time, seeing and hearing no additional questions, Councilmember Young, you still have your hand up, but do you have another item or? Oh, there it is. Great, perfect. Okay, so with that, I will call for a roll call vote on the motion that is on the floor. Councilmember David Hooverman.
Aye.
Councilmember Tom Keegan.
Yes.
Councilmember John Kides.
Yes.
Councilmember Jen McMurray.
I abstain.
Councilmember Nora Najelski-Eichner.
I also abstain.
Councilmember Diana Revelous.
I would abstain.
Councilmember Greg Burnett is an aye. That gives us 4 ayes, 0 nays, and 3 abstentions. The motion passed. The resolution will move forward to the full Common Council at the Tuesday, February 22nd meeting for full council approval. Just want to again thank everyone. It's been a long meeting, but a very important meeting. We wanted to hear from the public as it related to the operating budget. I want to give another acknowledgement to Chitsime for an outstanding job in reading all of those emails. That was not an easy task, but she navigated through it for us, and we thank her for that.
Thank
and
you.
also the finance, the whole finance team, Henry Dakowitz, Chitsime, Tom Ellis,
Yes.
you know, just, you know, a lot of number crunching, a lot of long nights, but we're moving forward. We're moving towards a goal. So with that, Diana Revelous.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. All those in favor show by a sign of raising your hand.
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the evening, what's left of it. Great.
No.